Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. But it wasn't the kind of farm you'd expect, with fields of crops and tractors chugging along rows of corn or beans. Ours was a pine tree harvestry. Pine needles are a big commodity for landscaping, and so we lived in the middle of 550 acres of carefully lined longleaf pines, their tall, straight trunks reaching into the sky like a never-ending army. That's all there was, miles and miles of identical trees, stretching out in every direction, standing in perfect rows, silent, unmoving. The house itself was strange. It had been built in the 1930s by some dentist who must have had odd taste, because it was a custom job, and not in a good way. There were weird corners, hallways that seemed too narrow or too wide, and rooms that didn't quite make sense in their layout. But the worst part, the part that still sticks with me, was the window. The living room had this massive picture window that stretched nearly the entire length of the wall, at least 50 feet long. The house sat on a gentle hill, so from that room, you could look out and see nearly a mile of trees. It was beautiful in the daylight, I suppose, but at night, when the moon was out and reflecting off the thin layer of winter snow, it was unsettling. The dogs would run around outside, their dark shapes flickering between the trees, and every now and then, you'd catch a glimpse of something that didn't seem right. I hated that room. I hated that window. But on this particular night, I hated it more than ever before. My cousin was over for the weekend. We were doing what kids do when they're stuck in the middle of nowhere, throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what would happen, laughing at the way certain things burned. It was getting late, and the fire was dying down, the last of the flames licking lazily at the logs. We decided to build a blanket fort, stacking up couch cushions and dragging in every blanket we could find. It was going to be a good night, a cozy night. But then the dogs started barking. At first, I didn't think much of it. The property stretched for a mile in every direction, and we had a lot of dogs, big ones, mutts mostly, but good for keeping coyotes and stray animals away. They barked at all kinds of things. Still, these barks weren't the usual playful or warning barks. They were deep, frantic, and coming from far away. Something was out there. Something that didn't belong. My cousin had gone quiet. He was staring out the window, completely still. I nudged him. "What?" I whispered, but he didn't answer. He just kept looking. That made me nervous. "What?" I asked again, louder this time. He hesitated, then finally muttered, "I feel like I'm seeing things." I turned to the window. My breath caught in my throat. A shadow moved between the trees. Not fast, not a blur, just a steady, deliberate movement. A figure, dark against the snow, walking briskly from one tree to the next. It was about 100 yards out, too far to see any details. I didn't react. Not at first. My cousin didn't either, because there's always that moment of doubt. That second where your brain tries to convince you that you didn't see what you just saw. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was nothing at all. But then it happened again. Another shadow. A different spot. Moving exactly the same way. Just a few quick strides between trees before vanishing. And then another. And another. They weren't coming closer. Not yet. They were just there. Watching. For half an hour, we sat frozen, barely breathing. Every few minutes, another figure would appear, move a short distance, then disappear again. It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. Someone, or something, was out there. I should mention, we didn't have neighbors. Not in the usual sense. The land surrounding our farm was owned by federal paper, meaning miles of untouched forest. Nobody was just passing through. If someone was out there, they meant to be there. And that was the part that scared me the most. Finally, one of them broke the pattern. Instead of appearing and disappearing, this one stopped. And then it ran, straight toward the house. That was when we lost it. We scrambled up, tripping over blankets and knocking over cushions, racing to wake my dad. He was half asleep, irritated, confused. We were talking over each other, voices shaking. He grumbled, swung his legs off the couch, and grabbed his rifle. He wasn't the kind of man to call the police. That wasn't an option for him. We locked the doors and windows. Every single one. The house was old, and we rarely locked up at night, There was no need, out in the middle of nowhere. But this night, every lock clicked into place. Every curtain was drawn. Every shadow felt like it was waiting for us to let our guard down. My dad sat in the living room with us for the rest of the night, rifle in his lap, eyes on the window. But nothing else happened. By morning, it almost felt like a bad dream. Almost. When the sun was fully up, we went outside to look. We had to know. The footprints were there. Everywhere. Clear as day. Leading between the trees in the same staggered pattern we had seen. Then we followed them closer to the house. They led right up to the window. And that was the worst part. I realized something I hadn't thought of before. While I had been sitting in the living room, looking out, the figures I had seen were standing on level ground. But the living room was elevated, 5 or 6 feet off the ground. That meant whoever had been standing directly in front of the window had been right beneath me. Close enough to see me. Close enough to watch. And I never saw them. My dad never talked about that night again. We didn't either. But after that, we started locking the doors. Every night. Without fail. When I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old, I spent a lot of nights at my grandma's house. She had this small, old house with creaky floors and dim lights that made everything feel a little off. It wasn't a scary place, not really, but at night, when the house got quiet and the shadows stretched across the walls, it felt different. It felt like the air got thicker, like the walls were closing in just a little. One night, I was trying to fall asleep in the spare bedroom. The bed was pushed up against the wall, and the only light came from the hallway where my grandma had left the door cracked open just a little. The glow from the kitchen light spilled in, making a long, narrow rectangle on the carpet. I remember tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, but I just couldn't. The blankets were too hot, then too cold. My pillow felt too lumpy, and I couldn't find a good spot to rest my head. I kept rolling from one side to the other, staring at the ceiling, the dresser, the little rocking chair in the corner. At some point, I rolled over onto my side, facing the room instead of the wall. And that's when I saw him. There was a kid standing next to my bed. He wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound, just standing there, looking down at me. He was holding a big, square present wrapped in old-fashioned paper with a bow on top. He had on strange clothes, not like anything kids wore in my time. The fabric looked thick, like wool or something, and he had a little hat, kind of like the kind you'd see in old pictures. But what made my stomach drop was the way he looked, like he was glowing. Not brightly, but enough that he seemed separate from the rest of the room, like he didn't belong there. I felt frozen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream for my grandma, but my throat felt locked up. My body was stiff, and I knew if I kept looking at him, I was going to panic. So I did the only thing I could think of. I rolled over, shut my eyes tight, and forced myself to breathe slow, trying to pretend I hadn't seen anything. I laid there for what felt like forever, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and sunlight was coming through the blinds. I never told my grandma about it. I never told anyone really. What could I even say? That I saw some kid standing by my bed, glowing? It sounded ridiculous, even to me. So I pushed it to the back of my mind, told myself I had imagined it, maybe a dream that felt too real. Years went by, and I didn't think about it much. Life moved on, and I grew up. Then one night, it happened again. I was older by then, maybe 12 or 13, and we had just moved into a new house. It was the first night sleeping there, and everything felt unfamiliar. The walls smelled like fresh paint, the floors were too clean, the air too still. My room had barely anything in it yet. Just my bed, a small dresser, and a few boxes stacked against the wall. I laid there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to get used to the quiet. No traffic sounds, no creaking pipes, no hum of the old fridge from our last house. It was just silence, thick and heavy. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed a bright light in the corner of my room. It wasn't like a flashlight or a street light shining through the window. It was something else. It was just there, in the corner, hovering. My stomach turned ice cold, and I couldn't look away. The second I focused on it, the light moved. Fast. It swooped down over me, a blur of brightness, and shot out my bedroom door. The sound it made was deafening, like a massive electrical buzz, loud enough that it left my ears ringing. I sat up, heart slamming against my ribs, and stared at my open doorway. There was nothing there, just darkness. My whole body was shaking, but I didn't move. I stayed up the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something else to happen. After that, things got weird. Not all the time, not every day, but just enough to make me uneasy. I started noticing things, little things, like how sometimes I'd be sitting on my bed, and it would feel like someone walked past me, just out of my line of sight. You know that feeling when a TV is on behind you, and someone walks in front of it, blocking the sound for just a second? It was like that, except there was never anyone there. And then there was what happened to my uncle. Years after I saw that kid at my grandma's house, my uncle moved into that same room. I had never told him what I saw, again. What was the point? But one morning, he mentioned something that made my stomach drop. He told us that he had woken up in the middle of the night to the feeling of someone sitting on the end of his bed. He didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but he felt the weight press down near his feet, shifting the mattress. He sat up, looked around, but there was nothing. A few minutes later, he felt it again, the weight lifting, like whatever it was had gotten up and left. He laughed it off, but I couldn't. I just nodded, pretending it wasn't getting to me, pretending my hands weren't shaking under the table. Because all I could think about was that boy standing next to my bed all those years ago, holding that present, staring at me like he was waiting for something. And I still don't know what he was waiting for. When I was 13, my mom used to drop me off at home after school before heading back out to pick up my younger brother. It was a normal routine. She'd pull up into the driveway, I'd hop out, unlock the front door, and step inside while she drove away. Our house was always quiet in the afternoons, and I usually went straight to the computer in the living room. The desk was positioned against the wall, the screen facing away from the rest of the house, so my back was always turned to the open space behind me. It never bothered me. I was used to being alone for that hour or so. That day wasn't any different at first. The house was empty when I walked in. The air was still, the way it always was when no one had been home for a while. I tossed my backpack onto the couch, kicked off my shoes, and sat down at the computer. It hummed as it booted up, the familiar blue glow of the monitor flickering to life. I clicked around, opening the browser, scrolling through websites, killing time the way I always did. Everything was normal, until I heard the sink turn on. It was a quick burst of water, just a couple of seconds. My first thought was that my mom must still be home, maybe rinsing something before she left. But I hadn't heard the front door open again after she dropped me off, and I hadn't heard her car outside. I turned my head slightly, listening. Silence. I went back to the screen, scrolling through some forum I'd been reading, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was just the pipes settling or something. But then I heard the microwave door swing open. The metal latch clicked as it shut. That was different. I froze, my hands hovering over the keyboard. The living room and kitchen were open to each other, separated only by a counter. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see much of the kitchen, but I could feel the shift in the air. That strange, heavy silence after a noise you weren't expecting. I slowly turned in my chair, my heart thudding. The kitchen looked the same as always. Nothing out of place. The cabinets were closed. The microwave sat untouched. The sink was dry, but I knew I had heard it. I waited, listening. I told myself to move, to check, but my legs felt stiff. My body felt wrong, like if I stood up too fast, something would react to it. I wasn't sure what, but the idea made my stomach tighten. Minutes passed. I don't know how long exactly. Maybe 2, maybe 5. I kept staring at the kitchen, at the empty space beyond the counter, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. The house was quiet again. I turned back to the computer, trying to focus. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just on edge for no reason. My mom was probably already on her way back. I just needed to wait. Then, I heard the front door open. The real front door. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. My mom and brother walked in, my brother's backpack slung over his shoulder, my mom's keys jingling as she locked the door behind her. I stared at them, my mind struggling to process it. They had just left. I had heard them leave, but they were walking in like they had been gone for a while. I swallowed hard, my voice dry when I finally managed to speak. Wow, that was fast. You just left. My mom gave me a weird look. What are you talking about? I left a while ago. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, watching them, waiting for something to make sense. But nothing did. The house was still, just like before. The kitchen was quiet. The microwave was closed. I wanted to tell her what I heard, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way everything looked so normal, like nothing had happened, like I was the only one who noticed anything strange. I didn't say anything else about it. That night, when I lay in bed, I kept going over it in my head. The sound of the sink, the microwave, the way I felt when I turned around, that awful sinking feeling that something was standing just out of sight. I couldn't shake it. I didn't sleep much. For days after, I paid closer attention. When I was alone, I listened harder. I moved differently. I checked the locks more often. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew something had been in that house with me. Something I never saw. Something I never heard leave. It never happened again. At least, not like that. But sometimes, even years later, I'll think about that day. About how small and normal it seemed at first. About how quickly it shifted. About how little it takes for something to feel wrong. And the worst part, the scariest part wasn't the sounds. It wasn't the idea of something being there. It was the fact that, for those few minutes, I had no reason to be afraid. I had no idea something was off. Not until it was over. And that still bothers me the most. I was never one to put much stock in dreams, let alone fever dreams. They were just noise in the head, stray thoughts mashed together. Nothing more than the mind playing tricks while the body fought off sickness. That's what I told myself, anyway. But sometimes, something happens that doesn't let you dismiss it so easily. It started in September 2006. I got sick. Not just the usual cold or flu. This was different. My fever was so high that I was barely aware of what was going on around me. My girlfriend at the time was taking care of me, changing the sheets when I sweated through them, switching out DVDs when one finished because I was too weak to do anything but watch whatever was playing. I should have gone to the hospital, but I thought I could tough it out. That was my mistake. 2 days in, the fever finally broke. I woke up feeling like I'd just returned from another world. My head was foggy, my body sore, but at least I wasn't burning up anymore. My girlfriend sat next to me, looking exhausted, and asked me who Donald Crisp was. I blinked at her, not sure if I'd heard her right. Donald Crisp? I knew the name. He was an old actor from the 1930s. I couldn't remember much about him, just that he'd been in some Lassie movies. I told her as much, confused about why she was asking. She gave me a strange look and said that while I was out of it, I kept calling out for him. Not just saying his name, but pleading with him, telling him he had to save her. When she asked me who he had to save, I apparently muttered, "Butto is coming back home to die." I had no idea what any of that meant. It was a fever dream, just nonsense my brain had put together while I was burning up. That's what I told myself. It was just random words, just a weird coincidence. I didn't think about it much after that. A year later, in 2007, I had a nightmare. Not the kind where you wake up, roll over, and forget about it. This one stuck with me. In the dream, I saw Indira Gandhi get shot. It wasn't like watching a movie. It felt real, like I was there. A man ran up to me, frantic, shouting, "It will happen to her too. Sind is no place for learned women." The man was familiar, though I couldn't place him right away. But then I knew Donald Crisp. I couldn't understand why he was there, why he was telling me this, but then the scene shifted. Dreams are like that. Now, I was watching as a woman in a blue dress and a headscarf got shot. Gunfire, screaming chaos. Fire spread through the crowd. The air was thick with smoke, the sounds of people running, shouting, crying. And then it shifted again. I was in a quiet lounge. Donald Crisp sat across from me, calm as ever, holding out a newspaper. I took it, confused. The paper looked old, yellowed with time. The headline read, "Butto killed in Sikh states." There was no date. The price was 5 cents. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but before I could process it, I woke up. I was rattled, but again, I told myself it was just a dream. I didn't know much about Benazir Bhutto at the time, other than that she was a political figure in Pakistan. I brushed it off as my brain pulling random things together. Then, 3 days later, she was assassinated. Shot, just like in my dream. It was unsettling. It wasn't just that I had dreamed about her death. It was the details, the eerie way they lined up. And Donald Crisp. Why was he in my dream? Why had he been in my fevered mutterings a year before? It made no sense. A week after Bhutto's assassination, I was watching Turner Classic Movies. I wasn't even paying much attention to what was on. Then the credits rolled for the next film, and there it was, Donald Crisp. The movie was Jezebel. It was too much. The fever dream, the nightmare, the assassination, and now this. I sat there, watching the screen, feeling like something was just out of reach, some piece of the puzzle that I couldn't quite grasp. I never had another dream about Donald Crisp after that, but I never found an explanation either. Maybe it was just a bizarre string of coincidences. Maybe my fevered brain had latched onto a name I'd heard before and twisted it into something strange. Maybe my subconscious had picked up on political tensions I hadn't been paying attention to, and the dream was just my mind processing it in some weird way. Or maybe it was something else, something I wasn't meant to understand. I don't know, and that's what unsettles me the most. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun began to set, the sky a mixture of soft pinks and oranges, casting long shadows across the front lawn. The house was quiet, more so than usual. My parents' cars were in the driveway, which meant they were home, but something about the stillness unsettled me. I closed my car door gently and walked up the porch steps, pushing open the front door. It creaked slightly, the way it always did, and I stepped inside, dropping my bag by the door. "Hello." I called out, expecting to hear my mom's voice from the kitchen or my dad's footsteps coming down the hall. Silence. I frowned. It wasn't like them to not answer. I kicked off my shoes and walked further inside, checking the living room first. The TV was off, the couches undisturbed, the throw blanket still neatly draped over the armrest. I moved down the hallway, peering into their bedroom. The bed was unmade, which was unusual for my mom, but nothing else seemed out of place. My own room was just as I had left it that morning. Maybe they had gone for a walk or were out in the backyard, but something felt wrong. I headed toward the kitchen, figuring there might be a note on the fridge explaining where they had gone. As I stepped through the doorway, my breath caught in my throat. The room was covered in blood. It was everywhere, the countertops, the floor, the sink. Dark red smears streaked across the cabinets, splattered across the fridge door. My stomach twisted at the sheer amount. It was fresh, still wet in places, the metallic scent thick in the air. My legs felt weak, my hands clammy. My breathing turned shallow as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to my parents. My second thought was that whoever had done this could still be in the house. Panic gripped me as my eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. I took a step back, nearly slipping on a pool of blood near my foot. My hands shook as I reached for the phone on the wall, desperate to call 911. The moment my fingers touched it, I recoiled. The receiver was slick with blood. Someone had grabbed it, tried to use it. I stared at the blood spattered across the wall by the phone, then followed the trail downward. It led toward the doors to the garage and the basement. The realization made my skin crawl. Whoever had been bleeding, whoever had done this, could still be here. I bolted for the front door. My pulse pounded in my ears as I yanked it open and stumbled outside, my voice finally breaking free in a scream. Just as I hit the front yard, a car pulled into the driveway. My mom's car. Right behind her, a police cruiser. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. The driver's side door flew open, and my mom jumped out, her clothes covered in blood. She looked frantic, her face pale and drawn. "We have to find Dad's finger." My mind struggled to process what she had just said. My heart was still hammering from the terror inside the house, but the words slowly sank in. My dad's finger. The blood. The phone. The police officer got out of the car, his radio crackling as he approached the house. My mom barely noticed him as she rushed past me, heading toward the backyard. I followed her, my legs shaky, my hands still trembling. The backyard looked normal, untouched by the horror inside. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flower beds undisturbed. But in the corner of the yard sat my dad's wood chipper, its red frame standing out starkly against the green grass. A pile of wood chips sat beside it, and suddenly everything clicked into place. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting again, but for a different reason this time. My dad had been using the chipper. Something had gone horribly wrong. I followed my mom as she frantically sifted through the pile of wood chips, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short bursts. The officer joined us, speaking into his radio, but I barely heard him. My eyes scanned the ground, searching for something I wasn't sure I wanted to find. We never did find it that night. My dad was alive, at the hospital, but his finger was gone. The next day, my mom told me to put the chipper away and move the wood chip pile. I didn't want to. I wanted to pretend none of it had happened, but I had no choice. I grabbed a shovel and started moving the pile, the weight of yesterday still pressing on my chest. And then I saw it. It was pale, white against the wood chips, the severed end raw and unnatural. It almost didn't look real, but it was. I didn't want to touch it. My stomach turned at the thought, but I knew I had to. Using 2 sticks, I lifted it carefully, my hands clammy despite the cool morning air. I carried it inside, feeling like I was holding something sacred, something lost and found too late. When I handed it to my father, tears filled his eyes. He hadn't cried at the hospital. He hadn't cried when they told him they couldn't reattach it. But now, as he looked at the small, lifeless piece of himself, he let out a shaky breath, and I saw the grief in his face. Later that day, we buried it in the backyard, next to our old dog. The ground was soft, the sun warm, but the moment felt heavy, final. Life went on after that. My dad learned to manage with one less finger. The blood in the kitchen was cleaned, the phone replaced, the wood chipper stored away. But every time I looked at that spot in the backyard, I remembered the terror, the confusion, the sick realization that had settled in my gut. Some things stay with you forever, and that day was one of them. When I was a kid, bedtime was always 8 o'clock. I never understood why I had to sleep so early while my family got to stay up. I would lay in bed listening to their voices in the kitchen, the clinking of silverware, the sudden bursts of laughter. It was comforting and cruel at the same time, like I was missing out on something important just because I was younger. That night was like any other. I was lying there, staring at the light coming from the hallway. The door to my room was open just enough for the warm yellow glow to spill in. I started squinting my eyes, making the light stretch into long, thin rays. It was a stupid little game I played to entertain myself, watching how far I could make them extend before blinking. And then I saw her. She was just there, standing in the doorway. An old woman, translucent but real, as if she were both there and not. Her long, curly yellow hair framed her pale face, and she wore a purple flower dress that looked faded, like it had been washed too many times. She didn't move. She only stared at me, her mouth stretched into a smile too big for her face, her eyes locked onto mine. It was the kind of smile that wasn't friendly, wasn't warm. It was wrong, unnatural, like a doll someone had forced into an expression it wasn't meant to have. My body locked up. My chest felt tight. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been filled with cement. My limbs wouldn't move. All I could do was stare back at her, feeling my pulse hammer against my ribs, my breath coming out in short, uneven gasps. Then, I did the only thing I could. I yanked the blanket over my head. Underneath it, I was shaking, my fingers clutching the fabric so tightly that my knuckles hurt. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears, it almost drowned out the sound of my family, still laughing in the kitchen. How could they not feel it? How could they not know she was there? The air in the room felt heavy, thick with something I didn't understand. I couldn't bring myself to look again. I didn't want to know if she was still standing there, still watching. I don't remember falling asleep. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The sun was peeking through my window, casting soft light across my room. Everything looked normal, safe, but I knew what I had seen. At breakfast, I asked my sister if we had a visitor the night before. My voice felt small when I spoke, like I wasn't sure if I wanted the answer. I told her what I had seen, every detail, and she just shrugged and said it was probably my guardian angel. Guardian angel? Bullshit. I never wanted to see that thing again. I tried to push it from my mind, but it lingered in the back of my head, creeping into my thoughts when I was alone in my room at night. The feeling of being watched didn't go away, not completely. I would lay there, staring at the hallway light like always, but now, I never let my eyes play tricks on me. I kept them wide open, scared that if I squinted, I might see her again. A few weeks later, I overheard a classmate talking about something strange. He had been outside late at night, going to close the garage door, when he saw someone standing in his backyard. A teenage boy. He was just standing there, looking straight at him. and his mouth was stretched into a grin too big for his face. My classmate didn't say anything. He just turned and ran inside. When I heard that, my stomach dropped. I didn't say anything either. I just sat there, my hands clenched into fists under the desk, feeling cold all over. I didn't know what it meant. I still don't. But I know what I saw that night wasn't my imagination. It wasn't some dream or a shadow trick. And it sure as hell wasn't an angel. Some things just exist in the dark. And sometimes they look right at you. I was on holiday in Cancun, Mexico. It was 2005, and I was 15 years old. The heat pressed down on the resort like an invisible weight, making the air thick and heavy. The ocean, though, was a relief. The water was warm, but still cooler than the sweltering afternoon air. I had spent the last hour or so swimming, diving under the gentle waves, letting the salt sting my skin and my eyes. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic, the sound of the water filling my ears, blocking out everything else. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough. My stomach was beginning to grumble, and the idea of something cold to drink sounded like heaven. I made my way out of the water, my feet sinking into the hot sand as I walked up the beach toward the apartment. The resort was beautiful, lush greenery everywhere, winding stone paths leading to rows of white buildings. Our apartment was on the second floor, overlooking a stretch of palm trees that swayed lazily in the warm breeze. I stepped inside, the cool air from the ceiling fan hitting my damp skin and sending a small shiver down my spine. It was quiet inside, the faint sounds of distant voices and the occasional crash of waves outside the only thing breaking the silence. My family must have still been out enjoying the afternoon. I made my way through the small living area and into my room, grabbing some fresh clothes from my suitcase before heading straight for the bathroom. As I shut the bathroom door behind me, I felt something land on the back of my hand. At first, I thought maybe a drop of water had fallen from the ceiling, but the sensation was heavier, more solid. I looked down, and in that split second, my entire body froze. It was black, large, covered in thick, wiry hairs. It completely covered the back of my hand, its too many legs splayed out, clinging to my skin. It was a spider. No, a tarantula. Some monstrous, eight-legged beast straight out of a nightmare. My breath caught in my throat, and for a brief second, I couldn't move. My brain refused to process what was happening. Then, suddenly, instinct kicked in. Fight or flight. Kill or be killed. I let out a sound, half a roar, half a strangled yell, and began shaking my hand violently, desperate to get the thing off me. My body acted before my mind could catch up, and I scrambled onto the toilet seat, my feet finding the cold porcelain in a clumsy attempt to escape. The thing flew off my hand, hitting the tiled floor with a sickening little thud. For a moment, it didn't move. I stared at it, heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. My hands were trembling, the phantom sensation of its legs still crawling over my skin. Maybe I had killed it. Maybe I had won. My confidence swelled just slightly, and I slowly lowered one foot back onto the floor. The second my toes touched the tile, it moved. I screamed, a full, unfiltered, high-pitched shriek that would have put any horror movie victim to shame. My survival instincts flipped back to flight mode, and I leaped back onto the toilet seat, pressing myself against the wall as if that would somehow help. The thing scurried across the floor, moving too fast, too erratically. Then, in an impossibly smooth motion, it climbed up the bathroom door. I could see it now, clinging near the top, still waiting. Watching. I was trapped. The toilet seat was no longer safe. It was going to kill me. I had no doubt in my mind that this thing had every intention of attacking, of leaping at my face the second I moved. But then, something strange happened. The longer I stared at it, the more something felt off. It wasn't moving quite like a spider, and something was wrong with its legs. They were too long, too spindly, and there were only 6 of them. My fear started to wane, just slightly. My brain worked desperately to match the shape of the creature to something familiar. I had seen something like this before. I knew this shape, and then it clicked. It wasn't a spider. It was a crab. A crab. In my bathroom. I let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a disbelieving wheeze. I had just nearly died, mentally at least, over a crab. It had no pincers, just its thin, creepy legs and a rounded body that had, at first glance, looked an awful lot like a tarantula. Relief flooded through me, though it was quickly followed by frustration. How the hell had a crab even gotten into my bathroom? There were no windows, and the door had been shut when I came in. The thing must have been in here the whole time, just waiting. I couldn't just leave it there. No way was I about to shower with that thing lurking around. I had to get rid of it. I scanned the small bathroom, my mind racing. Then, my eyes landed on the pan sitting beside the sink, a small plastic tub my mom had been using to rinse sand off our feet when we came back from the beach. Slowly, carefully, I reached for it, keeping one eye on the crab the entire time. It didn't move. Maybe it was scared. Maybe it was just as confused as I was about how this situation had unfolded. Either way, I wasn't taking any chances. With one swift motion, I slammed the pan over it. A satisfying thud echoed through the bathroom. For a moment, I stood there, heart still hammering, waiting to see if it would somehow escape. When it didn't, I carefully slid the pan across the door, trapping the crab inside. It took some maneuvering, but eventually I got the pan outside. I carried it down the steps, walking as quickly as I could toward the lagoon behind the resort. The whole time, I could hear the crab shifting inside, its legs tapping against the plastic. When I reached the water's edge, I crouched down, tilting the pan just enough to let the crab scuttle out. It hesitated for a moment before darting toward the lagoon, disappearing beneath the dark surface. I watched the water for a long time. I liked to think something ate it. An alligator, maybe. Or a big fish. Something higher up on the food chain. Something to remind it that it wasn't the biggest nightmare in the world. That was my title. I turned and walked back toward the apartment, the humid air clinging to my skin, the sun beginning to set in the distance. The little fucker. My dad was a mechanic, and when I was about 4 years old, he found a little dog at a junkyard. He was ugly, scrawny, and not much to look at, but something about him must have caught my dad's attention because he brought him home. My parents didn't plan to keep him. We lived out in the middle of nowhere in the Texas Panhandle. Nothing but open plains and big sky, and stray dogs didn't always last long. They were going to take him to the shelter, but I begged and pleaded to keep him. I promised I would take care of him, watch him, and be responsible. Looking back, I think they only let me keep him because they didn't think he would survive. I named him Ernie, after Sesame Street, and he did more than just survive, he thrived. Over the next 5 years, Ernie grew into the biggest, most beautiful dog I had ever seen. No one could believe he had started out as that little junkyard mutt. He was strong, muscular, and had a thick coat of fur that gleamed in the sun. His eyes were sharp, always alert, always watching. He followed me everywhere, through the fields, along the dirt roads, anywhere I went. By the time I was 9, I was allowed to drive the golf cart to my grandparents' house, which was about 2 miles away. The route was simple, a mostly straight shot across a few open fields, with a couple of barbed wire fences to climb through. Most days after school, I would take the golf cart and Ernie would trot alongside me, his tongue hanging out, tail wagging. One afternoon, I was halfway there when the golf cart's battery died. I tried turning the key a few times, but it was no use. It was going to be a long walk. Ernie was there, like always, pacing beside me as I started off through the grass. The sun was still high, and the wind moved across the fields in slow waves, rustling the dry grass. I wasn't worried about the walk. It was peaceful out there, and I knew the way by heart. After a few minutes, I noticed Ernie acting strange. He kept looking behind us, ears twitching. I stopped, listening, but I didn't hear anything. I figured maybe a rabbit or something had caught his attention. Then he turned toward me and started growling. It was a deep, low growl, the kind that sent a chill up my spine. He had never growled at me before. His fur stood up along his back, and his whole body tensed. My mind jumped to the worst possibility. I had just seen Old Yeller, and I was convinced that he had rabies. I panicked. My own dog was turning on me. I tried to run past him, but before I could take more than a couple of steps, he lunged at me. His weight knocked me to the ground, and I hit the dirt hard, the wind knocked out of me. He stood over me, silent now, his massive paws on either side of my chest. He wasn't biting, wasn't hurting me, just standing there, staring off into the distance. I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. My heart was hammering in my chest. Then, after what felt like forever, he stepped off me. He stayed in place, still as a statue, looking toward the ditch up ahead. His lips curled back slightly, and he let out another low growl. I scrambled to my feet and took off running, not stopping until I was nearly back home. I turned once to look, and Ernie was still standing there, unmoving. When I burst into the house, I told my dad what had happened, barely able to get the words out. He grabbed his gun. I knew what he was thinking, that Ernie had gone mad, that he needed to be put down. I begged him not to, but he just shook his head and walked outside. Time dragged. I sat in the kitchen, listening, waiting. Then, finally, a single gunshot echoed across the fields. I squeezed my eyes shut. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of boots on the porch. My dad stepped inside. Ernie was with him, tail wagging, tongue hanging out like nothing had happened. I was so confused. Dad set his gun down on the table and ran a hand through his hair. His face was pale, and I could see his hands shaking slightly. He told me that up ahead, just past the ditch where I had been walking, there had been a nest of rattlesnakes. Not just one or two, several coiled in the grass, hidden just out of sight. If I had kept walking, there was no way I would have missed them. He had never seen that many in one place before. Ernie must have heard them. He must have known. He had knocked me down to keep me from stepping right into the middle of them. For a long time after that, I thought about how close I had come, about what would have happened if Ernie hadn't been there, hadn't reacted the way he did. I had walked that path 100 times before, but I had always driven the golf cart over the other side of the trail. That day was different, and Ernie had known something was wrong before I ever could. I don't know where Ernie came from, what his life was like before my dad found him in that junkyard. But I do know that if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. He was more than just a dog. He was family, and he saved my life. It was a warm summer night, one of those evenings where the heat lingered in the air even after the sun had disappeared. The sky had turned a deep shade of navy, and the streetlights flickered on, casting their dull glow over the quiet neighborhood. My mom and I had made a habit of going on walks after dinner, just to stretch our legs and enjoy the cooler air. The roads were mostly empty, the sidewalks lined with neatly trimmed grass, and driveways leading to darkened houses where families were settling in for the night. The sound of frogs filled the air, an almost deafening chorus of croaks and chirps from the small ponds and ditches scattered throughout the area. It was the kind of background noise that became normal after a few minutes, blending into the rhythm of our footsteps as we walked. We turned down one of the quieter streets, a cul-de-sac with a handful of older houses. Most of them were dark, their owners likely asleep or watching TV behind drawn curtains. But as we walked past one particular house, something made us stop. At first, I barely noticed it over the frogs, but once I tuned in, it was unmistakable. A scream, high-pitched, desperate, like someone crying for help. It sounded human, but something about it was off. The same phrase, the same 3-second clip, playing over and over again. It was coming from the house just ahead, the one with the overgrown lawn and the dim porch light that flickered every few seconds. An old widower lived there. I had seen him a few times, usually sitting in a lawn chair on his porch, staring out at the street. He barely talked to anyone, just gave polite nods as we passed. I looked at my mom. She had stopped too, her face scrunched up in confusion. We stood there for a moment, just listening. The screaming didn't change, didn't waver. It was too steady, too unnatural, like a broken record. It had to be a TV, we told ourselves. Maybe he had left it on, fallen asleep with some crime show blaring. The idea made sense, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling in my gut. We kept walking, brushing it off as nothing. But the rest of the walk felt different, heavier somehow. The usual comfort of our quiet neighborhood seemed off. The frogs that had felt like background noise before now seemed unbearably loud, their croaking almost aggressive, as if they were trying to drown out the screaming. By the time we looped back around, nearly an hour later, I had mostly pushed it from my mind. But as we approached the house again, the sound was still there. Still the same pattern, the same short burst of screaming repeating itself. That was when the unease settled in for real. If it had been a TV, surely by now the scene would have changed. It had been almost an hour. No one watched the same 3-second clip for an hour straight. My mom and I stopped in front of the house again. The porch light still flickered. The windows were dark. There were a few other neighbors who had spare keys to the house. The old man had trouble getting around, so they helped him out when they could, checking on him, doing little things around the house. We walked up the street to one of them, a middle-aged couple who had lived here for years. They were the kind of neighbors who knew everything that happened on the block, the ones you went to if something seemed off. We told them what we heard, said it was probably nothing, but it was strange. They exchanged a glance before agreeing to go check on him. They hadn't seen him in a few days anyway, which wasn't too unusual, but enough to raise an eyebrow. They walked over while we waited by the sidewalk. I watched as they unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The frogs seemed even louder now, their noise almost suffocating. The screaming had stopped the second the door opened. The couple was inside for a while. The porch light kept flickering. The frogs kept croaking. The neighborhood was quiet otherwise. Finally, they came back out looking shaken. The old man had died 2 weeks ago. His body was still inside. It was the smell that hit them first, they said. Then the silence. No TV, no screaming. Just a dead house with a dead man inside. We stood there, absorbing that, the weight of it settling into our chests. The whole time we had been hearing that sound, he had already been gone. The couple called the authorities. We left soon after, walking home in silence. The frogs were still there, still filling the night with their endless rhythmic calls. I never walked by that house again without thinking about that night. The sound, the way it looped, the way it stopped the second the door opened. The way no one else had heard it but us. We never figured out what it was. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to. I was driving to a friend's house late one Sunday afternoon, the sun starting its slow descent, casting long shadows across the nearly empty road. The area I was driving through was an industrial part of South Tucson, a quiet stretch of Tulane asphalt lined with fenced-off lots, shuttered warehouses, and the occasional flickering streetlight. Most businesses in the area were closed on Sundays, leaving the streets barren. It wasn't unusual to go several blocks without seeing another car, so when I came up behind a vehicle moving at an agonizingly slow pace, about 15 miles per hour in a 40 miles per hour zone, I was already irritated. I followed for a minute, expecting the driver to pick up speed, but he didn't. I tapped my brakes to adjust, giving him space, but he kept crawling along as if he had nowhere to be. The road was straight and empty ahead, so I checked my mirrors, flicked on my signal, and moved into the opposite lane to pass. The second my car edged alongside his, he floored it. At first, I thought it was just bad timing, that maybe he hadn't noticed me and had just coincidentally decided to speed up. But then, just as I was about to merge back into my lane ahead of him, he jerked his car sideways, slamming into mine. The impact jolted me hard to the right, my tires screeching as I struggled to keep control. My heart pounded as I fought to keep my car from spinning out. I was too focused on keeping my car steady to process what had just happened. The guy had rammed into me. On purpose. My tires hit the gravel shoulder, kicking up dust and pebbles as I braked hard, finally coming to a stop just shy of a chain-link fence. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breathing was shallow, rapid. My rearview mirror showed the other driver, pulling up behind me. The driver's side door swung open aggressively, and a man stepped out. He was large, thick arms hanging stiffly by his sides as he took deliberate, heavy steps toward me. His face was twisted in anger, and even from inside my car, I could see his expression was pure rage. My brain snapped into high alert. My gut screamed at me to move, to get out of there, but I was frozen. My pulse hammered against my eardrums. I had no idea what his intention was, but none of the possibilities seemed good. I knew I couldn't fight him. I wasn't a big guy, and I wasn't armed. My only advantage was that my car was still running. My foot inched toward the gas pedal. And then I saw them. 2 men were standing about 10 feet away, watching. They hadn't been there a second ago, or at least I hadn't noticed them. But there they were, motionless on the sidewalk just beyond the edge of the road. One was a pale redhead, tall and lean. The other was an Asian guy, shorter, with a stocky build. They weren't talking. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, eyes locked on the man approaching me. The angry guy stopped in his tracks. His body went rigid, and for a second, he just stared at them. His head turned slightly, as if reassessing the situation. I saw something change in his face, a flicker of hesitation, a shift in his posture. Then, without a word, he turned around, walked back to his car, got in, and drove off. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were trembling. My heart was pounding against my ribs, so hard it felt like my chest might explode. I turned my head to look at the 2 men again, but they hadn't moved. They were still just standing there, watching me, not saying anything. Not approaching, just standing. I didn't want to stick around. I put my car in drive and pulled back onto the road, my hands still shaking. As I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The two men were still there, standing in the exact same spot, their figures growing smaller in the distance until they finally disappeared from view. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, somewhere more familiar, somewhere I could finally breathe. My head was still spinning, replaying every second of what had just happened. The guy who attacked me, the crash, the way he just backed off when he saw those two men. The way they stood there, in the middle of an empty industrial area, on a Sunday, watching, out of place in a part of town that should have been deserted. I never reported it. I should have. I could have gotten his plate number, could have at least told someone, but I didn't. Maybe because I just wanted to forget it, to put it behind me. Or maybe because some part of me knew that even if I had told someone, they wouldn't have believed the strangest part of it. The part that still lingers in my mind all these years later. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in guardian angels or fate. But I do believe that if those two men hadn't been there, standing silently on that sidewalk, things could have ended very differently for me that night. And I think about that more often than I'd like to admit. We had heard about the place from whispers around campus, the kind of rumors that make their way from one person to another in hushed voices, half in curiosity, half in warning. An entire abandoned town, fenced off in the foothills just outside the city, a place that had been left to rot for reasons no one seemed to know for sure. Some said it was an old government facility, others that it had been a planned community that never got finished, and a few even hinted at more sinister origins. We had no idea what the truth was, but for three guys who were into urban exploration, it was too tempting to pass up. It was almost midnight when we parked far away and started walking down the dark road. The streetlights ended long before we reached our destination, and the only illumination came from the moon and our flashlights, which we kept off to avoid drawing attention. The road was cracked, weeds growing through it, the kind of place that felt like it had been forgotten. We kept our voices low, footsteps quiet, scanning the area for the landmark we had heard about, a red house that marked the start of the path leading up the hill. When we finally found it, we hesitated for a moment. The house looked like any other, but there was something off about it, something that made my stomach feel tight. The windows were dark, no sign of life, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be inside watching us. We didn't stick around long. Instead, we climbed up through the thick brush, branches scratching our arms, trying to be as silent as possible. The climb was harder than I expected, and by the time we reached the fence, I was breathing hard. The entrance was exactly where we had heard it would be, a small hole cut into the iron fencing, barely big enough for us to squeeze through. It looked old, rust creeping along the edges where the metal had been sawed away. One by one, we pushed through, careful not to lose our footing on the steep incline. I went last, gripping onto the branches around me as I slid my legs through, finally pulling myself inside. I wiped the dirt off my jeans and looked up. An entire town stretched out before us. Not just a few abandoned buildings, but an entire town, houses, a market center, streets that branched off into different neighborhoods. Some structures were in better shape than others, but they all looked like they had been abandoned in a hurry. We stood there for a moment, taking it all in. There were no streetlights, no signs of movement, just rows of empty buildings under the moonlight. We decided to start with the apartment complex. It was one of the largest buildings, its windows shattered in places, the doors barely hanging onto their hinges. As we made our way inside, we stepped over broken glass and debris, the air thick with the scent of mildew and rot. Some rooms were empty, others had furniture left behind, mattresses with stains I didn't want to think about. Then we heard it, a faint beeping sound. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, a soft, steady beep, like a warning tone. We looked at each other, but didn't say anything. Maybe it was an old smoke detector running low on battery, maybe a piece of forgotten machinery still clinging to life. We kept moving. The second apartment we entered was worse. The living room was filled with black trench coats, some hanging from the walls, others crumpled on the floor like they had been tossed there in a hurry. It was a strange sight, and it made my skin crawl. Who left them here? Why? Upstairs, one of the doors was locked. The only locked door we had found so far. We didn't try to force it open. Something about it felt wrong. We left the building quickly, trying to shake the uneasy feeling settling over us. Outside, the beeping had multiplied. It was no longer one sound, but several, coming from different directions. Some closer, some further away. We started walking toward another building, and I noticed something unsettling. The closer we got to a structure, the louder the beeping became. The feeling of being watched crept over me. We moved faster. That's when we saw the house. It was small, the paint peeling off, but what stood out was the shattered glass in the front yard. It wasn't just scattered, it was arranged in neat, square piles leading up to the front door, almost like markers. We stopped. Something wasn't right here. Before we could decide whether to check it out, a beam of light flashed from the second-floor window. A bright, blinding light, sweeping across the yard, landing directly on us. The beeping sounds grew faster, more frantic. Then another light turned on from a different building. Then another. One by one, beams of light snapped on, illuminating the streets, casting our shadows in every direction. We ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could. The lights followed us, flashing on from every direction, shadows stretching and twisting as we sprinted through the town. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. One of my friends tripped. I barely had time to register it before he was back on his feet, pushing forward, his face pale and terrified. We didn't know where we were going, only that we had to get out. Somehow, miraculously, one of my friends found the hole in the fence. He dove through, scrambling down the hill. I grabbed my other friend and shoved him through next. I stood there for half a second, and that's when I saw it. Not a person, not a figure, but movement. Shadows flickering just beyond the reach of the lights, fast, purposeful. I didn't wait to see what it was. I dropped to the ground, sliding through the hole, feeling branches scrape against my skin as I tumbled down the hill. We hit the road running, breath ragged, legs shaking. The beeping faded behind us, replaced by the deafening silence of the empty night. We reached the car and didn't look back. We got in and drove away, the town vanishing behind us. 3 months later, we went back. The fence was gone. The buildings were gone. Everything was gone. We found a construction crew working on the site and asked what had happened. The man we spoke to barely glanced at us as he worked. Said the place had been a hotspot for gangs. Drugs, murders, the worst of it. The city had decided to wipe it off the map. I don't know who was in that town that night. I don't know what those beeping sounds were, or why lights suddenly appeared in so many different buildings at once. But I do know one thing. We were never supposed to be there. Junior year of high school, I got off the bus a couple of stops early to hang out at my friend's house after school. It wasn't anything unusual. I did it from time to time, especially if there was a new video game to check out. His house was a short walk from my usual stop, and my parents never really questioned it, so I didn't think it was a big deal. We sat on his couch, controllers in hand, shouting at the screen, getting lost in the game. His mom was in the kitchen, cooking something, and the house smelled like garlic and onions sizzling in a pan. I was deep in the game when his mom came into the living room, her phone pressed against her ear. She had this look on her face, like she wasn't sure if she should be angry or confused. She handed the phone to me. It was my mom. She was mad, really mad. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the noise of the game like a knife. She told me to come home. Now, I thought I was in trouble for not coming straight home, but something about her tone didn't make sense. She wasn't just mad, she sounded scared. I didn't ask questions, just put down the controller and left. My friend gave me a confused look, but didn't say anything. I walked fast, my heartbeat picking up, not because I was afraid of getting grounded, but because something felt off. The way she spoke, the urgency in her voice, it didn't sit right. When I got home, the atmosphere was thick. My mom, my sister, and my sister's friend were all in the living room, looking shaken. My mom started firing questions at me the second I walked in. Where was I? What was I doing? Who was I with? I told her the truth. I went straight to my friend's house after school. I was there the whole time, and I didn't go anywhere else. But she wasn't buying it. She kept shaking her head, pacing, muttering under her breath like she was trying to make sense of something that didn't add up. She finally told me why she was so upset. While I was at my friend's house, she had been in her bedroom when she heard my name being called from outside. She went to the window, looked down into the backyard, and saw my sister and her friend standing there. But they weren't alone. There was a guy standing behind my sister's friend, his arms wrapped around her. He wasn't wearing a shirt. My mom thought it was me. The height, the build, it was close enough. She yelled my name again, but the figure didn't look up. She was furious, thinking I was out there doing something I wasn't supposed to. She stormed outside, ready to catch me in the act. But when she got there was no guy. Just my sister and her friend, standing exactly where she had seen them from the window. My mom demanded to know where I was. She didn't believe them when they told her I hadn't been there at all. She thought I was hiding somewhere, messing with her. But I wasn't. I was miles away, at my friend's house, completely unaware of what was happening. My sister was shaken up, but it was her friend who looked the worst, like she had seen a ghost. My mom kept pressing them, but they had no answers. They told her, over and over, that no one else had been with them. It had only been the two of them the entire time. Later, when things calmed down, my sister finally explained why her friend was acting so weird. That day was the 1-year anniversary of her fiancé's suicide. She had come over because she needed someone to talk to, someone to distract her. And his name, it was the same as mine. My mom had no way of knowing that. She had no reason to expect anything unusual, no reason to see something that wasn't there. But she was sure about what she had seen. She wasn't mistaken. She wasn't imagining things. She was convinced that, for a moment, she had seen someone standing there, someone who shouldn't have been there. After that, no one talked about it much. My mom stopped pushing for an explanation because there wasn't one that made sense. My sister's friend left not long after, and she never mentioned it again. But the feeling in the house that night was heavy. No one could explain it, but no one could shake it either. My mom knew what she saw, and I knew, without a doubt, that it wasn't me. I've always said that my friend has the wildest stories. If I didn't know her personally, I'd probably think she was making half of them up. But I know better. I know her, and I know that somehow, the strangest shit always happens to her. Normally, it's funny stuff, the kind of thing you'd tell at a party while everyone laughs and shakes their heads. This one wasn't funny. This one still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. She was about 20 when it happened. She and some friends had gone out drinking one night. Nothing crazy, just a normal night at a bar. The kind where you know you're probably going to wake up with a headache the next day, but nothing more than that. It wasn't some dive bar in a sketchy part of town, either. It was one of those places with overpriced drinks and dim lighting. The kind of bar where you'd expect to see people dressed up for a date or co-workers unwinding after a long week. Just normal. It was past midnight when they finally called it a night. She and her friends stepped out onto the sidewalk, the air cold against their warm, flushed skin from the alcohol. They stood around lingering, saying their goodbyes, waiting for Ubers or just enjoying that loose, happy feeling that comes at the end of a good night out. And then it happened. There were two guys a little ways down the sidewalk. At first, my friend wasn't even paying attention to them, just another couple of drunk guys talking too loudly. But then one of them yelled. Something about his girlfriend. Something about the other guy looking at her. It was stupid, the kind of thing that shouldn't be anything more than a few chest-thumping words before everyone moves on with their night. Except this guy wasn't just running his mouth. He pulled a knife. It was so fast, so sudden, that my friend almost didn't process it. 1 second, they were just two guys arguing. The next, one of them was clutching his stomach, eyes wide, mouth open but making no sound. The other guy was already running, disappearing into the night, leaving behind nothing but the horror he'd just caused. At first, nobody moved. It was like time had frozen. The people who had been walking past just stopped and stared. My friend's friends just stood there, caught between the haze of alcohol and the sheer disbelief of what had just happened. Nobody reacted. Nobody did anything. But then my friend's body moved before her mind caught up. She was on her knees beside him, hands pressing against his stomach. The blood was warm, sticky, soaking into her hands, her clothes. The man made a sound then, a gasping, wheezing noise that didn't sound like something a person should make. He was shaking. His eyes darted around, wild and unfocused. She started talking to him. She didn't even remember what she said later, just that she kept talking, kept telling him he was going to be okay, kept asking him his name, kept begging him to stay awake. Her hands pressed down harder, trying to slow the bleeding. Someone finally had the presence of mind to call 911. The minutes stretched out into forever. She knew people were standing around, watching, whispering. She knew her friends were there, but they might as well have been miles away. It was just her and him, just the warm, sticky feeling of his blood on her hands, the tremors running through his body. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't yelling. He was just making these small, wet sounds in his throat that made her want to scream for him. She had never seen someone bleed like that before. Sure, we've all seen it in movies, but this wasn't the movies. This was real. And real was so much worse. It wasn't just red. It was dark, almost black in the dim streetlights, and it came out in pulses, in waves, soaking everything. It had a smell to it, too metallic, sharp, something that clung to the back of her throat. She could taste it in the air. She wasn't even sure how long it took before the sirens came. It felt like forever. When they did, everything became a blur. People moved out of the way, the flashing lights bouncing off the buildings, the red and blue mixing with the dark. The paramedics pushed her aside, voices quick and clipped, all business. She let them take over. She sat back on the pavement, hands still covered in blood, feeling like the world had suddenly started spinning too fast. She just sat there. People moved around her. Her friends spoke to her, but she didn't answer. Someone offered her water, but she couldn't bring herself to take it. She just sat there, staring at her hands, at the red that covered them, at the mess that had once been a person's inside now smeared across her fingers. Shock. That's what they told her later. That she'd gone into shock. That it was normal. That it was okay. The paramedics had noticed her, too. One of them crouched in front of her, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, talked to her in a calm, steady voice. Asked her if she was okay. She wanted to laugh at that. Okay. She wasn't the one who'd been stabbed. But her body was shaking, and she couldn't stop staring at her hands. The blood had dried in the creases of her fingers under her nails. She sat there for what felt like hours, even though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, she let her friends pull her to her feet. She let them take her home. She showered, but no matter how much she scrubbed, she still felt dirty. The smell of blood was in her nose, in her hair, in her mouth. She couldn't get rid of it. She found out later that the guy had survived. Barely. If she hadn't been there, if she hadn't reacted as fast as she did, he wouldn't have made it. That should have made her feel better, but it didn't, because it wasn't just about him. It was about everything else. About how fast it had happened. About how nobody had moved at first. About how she had held his life in her hands, literally, and she hadn't even had time to think about it. She stopped going out for a while after that. The thought of being in a crowd made her stomach turn. The thought of being around drunk people, of hearing someone yell, made her heart pound in the worst way. She said she was fine. She wasn't. It took her months to feel normal again. Maybe she never really did. It all turned out okay in the end, I guess. But I still can't shake it. Still can't stop thinking about how something like that can happen anywhere, at any time, without warning. It wasn't a horror story. It wasn't some urban legend or ghost tale. It was real. And that's what makes it so terrifying. I had just turned 13 when it happened. That night, everything about the way I slept was wrong. I was an avid side sleeper, always curling up in a ball or hugging a pillow. But for some reason, I had fallen asleep on my back. Maybe it was because I had gotten my first period that night and felt strange in my body, unfamiliar in my own skin. Maybe it was just one of those nights where you wake up and everything feels slightly off. I was dreaming. In the dream, I was sitting in a chair, balancing it on its back legs like I used to do at the dinner table when my mom would scold me. Only this time, when the chair tipped back, it didn't stop. Slowly, it kept tilting further and further back, as if gravity had decided to change its rules. I felt the pull of the void beneath me, endless and dark, swallowing me as I fell. My stomach clenched as I realized I was falling into nothing, into eternity. The feeling was so intense that it shocked me awake. My eyes opened, and I was instantly aware of something wrong. There was something above me, hovering just inches from my face. My breath caught in my throat. It was a figure tall and cloaked, but what I noticed first, what burned itself into my mind forever, was its face. It wasn't a normal face. It was flat, almost like it had been pressed down, removing any real depth. The skin, if I could even call it that, was smooth and white like porcelain. The nose was reduced to just 2 holes, and the mouth was a thin, quivering line. But the worst part was the eyes. Large, glassy, and oval. They bore into me with a hatred so pure and raw that I could feel it physically, like heat radiating from a fire. It wasn't just staring at me. It was devouring me with its gaze. I tried to move. Nothing. I tried to scream, but my throat refused to work. I could only stare back at it, completely paralyzed, locked in place by whatever force it held over me. The weight of its hatred pressed down on my chest, suffocating. This wasn't just fear. It was something else entirely. It was like I was being stripped away, like it was trying to take something from me, something deeper than my life. For what felt like an eternity, I lay there, helpless under its gaze. Then, somehow, I managed to force out the weakest, tiniest whimper. The moment that sound escaped my lips, everything changed. The figure straightened up in a single, jerky movement, standing impossibly tall, its head nearly reaching the ceiling. It didn't vanish, didn't disappear into the shadows like a ghost from a horror movie. Instead, it stepped back, still watching me, still seething. It began pacing at the foot of my bed, back and forth, its movements quick and unnatural. It reminded me of a caged animal, like a tiger pacing behind glass, furious that it couldn't reach its prey. The room felt thick with its frustration. I could sense it pressing against an invisible barrier, trying to push through, trying to reach me. Every step it took sent a wave of something, energy, hatred, desperation, crashing against me. I could feel it clawing, straining to get closer, to finish what it had started. I forced myself to sit up, even though my body screamed against it. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The thing stopped pacing. It stood there rigid, staring at me with those awful, unblinking eyes. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked toward my closet. My closet door was open just a crack. I hadn't even realized it. The thing slipped through the opening, moving in a way that didn't seem possible, as if it were sinking into the darkness itself. But it didn't disappear. Not yet. It stood there, half hidden behind the door, its face still visible in the dim light of my nightstand lamp. And it kept staring. Its entire body quivered, not with fear, but with rage. It was furious. Furious that it couldn't reach me. Furious that I had somehow resisted. It stayed there, staring, until very slowly, it began to fade. Not like mist, not like a shadow vanishing. It was more like an image being erased, like it was never really there to begin with. But I knew it had been. I didn't sleep again that night. I couldn't. As soon as the thing was gone, I threw myself out of bed and ran to the living room, turning on every single light in the house. I sat on the couch, curled up with a blanket, knees to my chest, and stared at nothing until the sun came up. For years, I told myself it was sleep paralysis. That made sense, right? Sleep paralysis could cause hallucinations, could make you feel trapped, could make you see things that weren't really there. I clung to that explanation like a lifeline because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. Then years later, I met her. She was just a friend at first. Someone I had met through mutual friends. Someone I got along with. One night, we were talking about weird dreams and creepy experiences, just messing around. That's when she told me her story. She had been up late one night, sitting in bed with her door open, when she saw something in the living room near the kitchen. A figure standing there, watching. She looked away for just a second, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. When she looked back, it was still there, and then it beckoned her. I felt my stomach drop. I asked her, my voice shaking, what it looked like. She hesitated. Then she started describing it. The flat, white face. The huge, glassy eyes. The thin, quivering lips. The pure, seething hatred it radiated. I didn't say a word. I got up, grabbed a sketchbook, and handed it to her. "Draw it," I said. She did. When she handed me the drawing, my hands shook. I was staring at the same thing. The exact same thing. She had never heard my story before. I had never told anyone, never described it in detail to anyone. And yet, there it was, staring back at me from the page. I don't know what we saw. I don't know if it was real or something beyond what we can understand. But I do know one thing. I never slept with my closet door open again. And I never, ever will. When I was in high school, I had a class in a part of the building known as the Orange Hall. It wasn't actually orange, at least not anymore. Maybe it had been years ago before someone repainted it beige, but the name stuck. It was an older part of the school, quieter than the rest, with classrooms that had doors that didn't quite shut right and windows that rattled when the wind hit just right. The lighting always seemed dimmer there, like the bulbs were just a little too old, no matter how often they were replaced. I had a class there every day, second period. It was just an ordinary class, nothing special about it. But there was one thing that stuck with me, something that bothered me every single day. Every day, sometime during class, I would hear someone whistling. Not just any tune, but Pop Goes the Weasel. But they whistled it slow. Too slow. Not in the playful way people usually did. Just a slow, almost dragging tune, stretching out the notes, making the simple melody feel off. At first, I thought it was just some student trying to be annoying, but it happened every day, around the same time. Always the same way. That slow, steady whistle drifting down the hall. The teacher never acknowledged it. No one in class seemed to either. A couple of times, I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but if they did, they didn't react. It wasn't loud. It was always faint, just at the edge of hearing, like whoever was doing it was never quite close enough to pinpoint. I tried ignoring it, but something about the sound got under my skin. It was like an itch in my brain that I couldn't scratch. It wasn't until 2 years later that I thought about it again. I was a senior by then, and my schedule had me back in the Orange Hall. Different class, different teacher, but the same hallway. I had almost forgotten about the whistling. I hadn't heard it since my sophomore year, and it wasn't like it had been anything more than an odd annoyance. Then, on the second day of class, I heard it again. The same tune. The same slow, drawn-out notes. I froze the moment it started, my stomach dropping like I had just missed a step on the stairs. It had been 2 years. No way was some student still doing this. That made no sense. Students graduated, schedules changed, people moved on. But the whistling hadn't. It was exactly the same. I started paying attention after that. It wasn't every single day, but almost. Always around the same time, just a little after class started. Sometimes it was so faint I almost thought I was imagining it, but it was there. It was real. A couple of times, I stayed behind after class, just standing in the hall, trying to see if I could spot who was doing it. But the hallway was always empty. No one there. No one even walking away in the distance. The sound just faded, like it had never been there at all. I asked a friend once if they had ever noticed it, but they just shrugged it off. Said they probably had, but never thought about it. It was just some weird thing. I let it go after that. I figured maybe it was just one of those things that happened, some stupid in-joke between students that got passed down year after year. I was graduating soon. I had other things to think about. Then my sister started high school. She's a lot younger than me, so by the time she started, I had already been out for years. We didn't talk about school much. There wasn't much to say. But one day, completely out of nowhere, she mentioned something about how her friend had been talking about a weird sound they always heard in the Orange Hall. I knew what she was going to say before she even said it. Someone whistling Pop Goes the Weasel. Slow. Almost every day. I asked her if she had heard it herself. She said she hadn't, but her friend swore it happened all the time. The weirdest part, her friend had asked their teacher about it. Just as a joke, probably. But the teacher had answered. Said it had been happening for at least 10 years. Every year. Every day. Same time. They had never found who was doing it. That was what made my skin crawl. 10 years. Maybe more. That meant it wasn't just students messing around. It wasn't some prank that got passed down. That didn't make sense. Even if it had started as a joke, someone would have eventually gotten caught. A teacher, a janitor, someone would have found the person doing it. But no one had. Ever. I don't know why it bothers me so much. It's just whistling. Just a song. But it doesn't feel like that. It never did. It always felt off. I don't think I'll ever get an answer for it. Maybe it's better that way. The night was cold, the kind that settled deep in the bones no matter how many layers you wore. My friend and I were driving home after our final exam, relieved that it was finally over. The city streets were quiet, streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I slowed as we approached a major intersection, stopping in the right lane behind a row of cars. The side street to my right was empty. The light was red, the kind that seemed to last forever. My fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the steering wheel, my breath fogging slightly on the windshield. Then, the screech of tires. A split second later, the unmistakable sound of metal slamming into metal. The impact jolted the car violently, throwing my head forward. My heart jumped into my throat. My car rocked from the force, but it wasn't a direct hit. It had struck the rear right side. I took a deep breath and looked over at my friend. He was wide-eyed but unharmed. We both stepped out, the cold air biting at my face. The other driver had already gotten out, rubbing his forehead. The street lights reflected off his dented front bumper and the crumpled side of my car. We exchanged information, both of us still shaking. I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures, carefully documenting the damage from different angles. I stepped into the left southbound lane to get a wider shot. I looked up the road. Nothing. A few hundred meters of open space. I crouched, angling the camera to include the street signs in the background. My friend called out to me, asking me to unlock the trunk so he could grab paper to write a witness statement. I took one last shot and turned to step back toward my car. A rush of air. The roar of an engine. My foot barely hit the pavement before a car tore past, no more than a foot from where I had been standing. The force of its passing ruffled my jacket. My body locked up. My mind caught up a moment later. It had drifted into the wrong lane. The driver's attention focused on the accident instead of the road. If I had stayed where I was for just one more second. I shook the thought away and exhaled. My friend was staring at me, his face pale. I avoided his gaze and focused on unlocking the trunk. The entire drive home, the image of that car missing me by an inch replayed over and over in my head. 2 days later, I was at a paintball field with the same friend and a few others. The place was crowded, the sounds of compressed air hissing and paintballs splattering filling the air. Between matches, we stood in the lobby, removing our masks. The rules were clear, safety's on, barrel covers in place. I leaned against the wall, letting my muscles relax from the tension of the last round. My friend nudged me, asking if I could lend him some cash to buy more paint. I shifted slightly, my back still against the wall, and reached into my pocket. As I placed my wallet in his hand, a sharp splat rang through the air. I turned my head just in time to see a smear of bright yellow paint exactly where my head had been seconds ago. My heart stopped. A kid across the room had been setting his marker down when his safety failed, the barrel cover snapping loose. The shot had been a complete accident, but that didn't change the fact that if I hadn't moved at that exact moment, the paintball would have struck me straight in the eye. A direct hit at that speed. I forced myself to breathe. My pulse was hammering. My friend was saying something, but I couldn't hear him over the rush of blood in my ears. The thought of what could have happened, what almost happened, made me feel sick. That night, I barely slept. 2 days later, we were out drinking with the same group, walking along a major street. The cold air stung my face, but I barely noticed. My mind was still stuck on the close calls. The past week felt unreal, a series of moments where something just barely kept me from serious injury, or worse. I walked fast, as I always did, occasionally turning to wait for the others. The street was quiet except for the occasional passing car. We were close to our destination, just a few more meters to go. I looked back again. They were still too far behind. The cold bit at my skin, so instead of stopping, I decided to just keep moving. Then, something made me stop. I didn't know why. I turned back to them and called out that I'd meet them inside. As the last word left my mouth, the deep roar of an engine exploded through the air. My head snapped to the left. A Porsche, speeding straight toward me, veered out of control. Tires shrieked. The car slammed into the west wall of a building just 10 meters in front of me. The impact shook the air, glass and debris scattering across the pavement. The front of the car crumpled, the driver's side airbag deploying. A second of complete silence followed before the wail of car alarms and distant shouts. I stood frozen. My brain refused to process what had happened. My feet should have carried me forward. I should have been right there, caught between the car and the wall. I should have been. My stomach twisted. My fingers tingled. I took a step back, then another. The others caught up, staring at the wreckage, at me. I could barely hear them. I felt like I was sinking, like the world had tilted slightly beneath me. 2 days later, I woke up sweating. My breath was ragged, my body stiff. The dream clung to my mind, the kind that didn't fade when you opened your eyes. It wasn't just a bad dream. It was vivid, real. I had been running. My feet hit the pavement as I leapt out of a panel van, a rope gripped in my hand. My mind knew, without any explanation, that someone was trying to kill me. My driveway stretched ahead of me. I ran, my breath sharp in my chest. The front door was open. I barreled inside and slammed it shut. My hands worked fast, tying the rope to the doorknob. I didn't know why, but I knew the other end was tied to them. The person chasing me. The house was silent, but the feeling of being watched made my skin crawl. I locked and barricaded every door, every window. My fingers dialed 911, but the operator told me no one could help me. Every officer was busy. Then the rope was cut. Suddenly, every noise possible roared to life. The kettle whistled, the stove fan blared, the toilet flushed, the shower ran, the TV crackled, the radio blasted static. My breath caught in my throat. A single footstep echoed from the top of the stairs. My eyes snapped up. A foot. The first step. Then another. Coming down. I woke up screaming, my body drenched in sweat. My lungs ached from the force of it. My chest heaved. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The room was dark, my blankets twisted around me. My throat was raw. The dream was already slipping away, but the fear remained. My heart wouldn't slow. I sat there for what felt like hours, my body unwilling to move. I thought about everything. The accident, the paintball, the car crash, the dream. I ran my hands over my face, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. That something had been trying to tell me something all along. I never figured out what, and I still don't know how I made it through that week. The night was cold, but not unbearable. The kind of cold that settled into your bones gradually, a dull discomfort that would eventually be ignored. I shifted my gear, adjusting the weight of my rifle as I took up my position at the rear of our team. We had been walking for hours, covering ground quickly and efficiently, relying on the moonlight and our knowledge of the terrain to move undetected. The mission was simple: get in, confirm whether shipments of mortar rounds and mines were being moved through the area, and get out before sunrise. The terrain was forgiving, relatively flat with only the occasional rolling hill or patch of thick undergrowth. We were making good time. The new guys in our group had settled into the rhythm of the movement, finally understanding the importance of silence and fluidity. I had my usual position at the back, covering our six, with Elle just ahead of me. We had worked together long enough to trust each other's instincts. If one of us heard something, the other was already looking in the same direction before a word needed to be said. About 10 kilometers in, we paused for a quick check. Supplies, ammunition, water. Everything was fine. The extraction point was still some distance away, over a hill and near the edge of a village. As everyone got ready to move out, I caught something in the trees, maybe 50 meters off. A shift in the darkness, something that wasn't just the wind. Elle had seen it too, his head turned slightly in the same direction. We waited. The new guys didn't look back. They weren't trained to yet. We were getting left behind. It could have been anything. A deer. A fox. But we had spent enough time in the dark to recognize when something felt wrong. We moved in bounds, covering each other as we caught up to the team. The noise followed. I whispered to Elle to go on ahead, to reach the others while I stayed behind. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding and disappearing into the night. I took position behind cover, slowing my breathing, forcing my heart rate down. Another shift in the trees. This time closer. 15 meters, maybe less. The underbrush moved, and then everything stopped. Silence. 2 minutes passed, each second dragging longer than the last. My eyes scanned every shadow, every outline of tree and rock. Then, the others returned, moving into position, surrounding the area. I signaled where I had last seen movement, and we closed in. Nothing. No tracks. No sign that anything had been there at all. The new guys laughed, Elle and I taking the brunt of their jokes. Just another night in the field. We moved on, 2 more kilometers without incident. The landscape changed slightly, shifting into an orchard. The trees were spaced apart, but the moonlight made them cast long, thin shadows across the ground. We moved through the center, using the trunks for cover as we crossed. Then, just before I stepped into the orchard, the noise came again. A small sound, barely more than a breath on the wind. And then laughter. High, soft, and unmistakably a child's. I froze. My first thought was that I had misheard. My mind playing tricks on me. I was expecting an animal, not a child. I turned my head, scanning behind me. Nothing. Ahead, Elle had moved forward, another 20 meters. He turned slightly, waiting for me to catch up. I forced myself forward, crouching beside a tree for just a moment before moving again. That's when I saw it. The knots in the bark caught my eye. The way they twisted, the shapes forming in the moonlight. At first, it was just a pattern, an illusion of the night. But then the face shifted, turned toward me. A small child, features smooth and delicate, eyes wide and curious. She smiled, then a hand lifted, tiny waving, and the laughter came again, as light as a breeze. And then she was gone. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind scrambled to make sense of what I had just seen. It wasn't possible. I knew that. It wasn't real. I told myself that. But I also knew there was no way I was telling anyone what I had just seen. Without thinking, I pushed forward, catching up to Elle, keeping my mouth shut. I forced my breathing to steady, my face to remain neutral. I had seen nothing. It had been nothing. The mission ended without further incident. We reached the extraction point before sunrise, boarded our transport, and left the area behind. I told myself to forget about it. It wasn't real. 2 weeks passed. Another mission. I was reassigned for a short stint with a group of combat engineers. We were clearing a minefield near a village, marking the explosives, ensuring the safety of the locals. It was a different kind of work, slower, methodical. I didn't mind. It kept my mind occupied, kept me from thinking about things I didn't want to think about. When I returned to base, my team had already come back from another patrol through the same area we had been in 2 weeks before. As I stepped into my barracks, I heard laughter. The guys were giving Elle hell about something. I caught his expression, stone-faced, unwilling to engage. One of them turned, grinning at me. Elle doesn't want to patrol your favorite spot anymore. More laughter. I said nothing. I just waited. Let the moment pass. A few days later, Elle and I were out on another assignment, working with a scouting unit. We moved together, the same way we always had. Trusted each other the same way we always had. Then, as we paused for a moment, he turned to me. "What did you see that night?" I hesitated. "Nothing." He shook his head. "I know you saw her." A chill passed through me, slow and deep. I didn't respond. "I saw her too," he said, his voice quiet. "Tell me I'm not crazy." I swallowed, forced myself to breathe. Then, finally, I said, "You're not crazy." He nodded, looking away for a moment before turning back. "Where did you see her?" My mouth felt dry. The words felt heavy. "Inside a tree." Elle didn't react right away. He just stood there, staring past me into the dark. Then he nodded again. "Me too." We didn't speak about it again. There was nothing to say. The orchard was still there. The trees were still standing. And somewhere, deep in those woods, she was still waiting. A few years ago, there was a small plane accident that occurred in a neighboring town. I was part of the county volunteer search and rescue group, and when we got the call, I was one of the responders sent to see if there was any chance of a survivor from the crash. We found out from the sheriff that it was an elderly couple and their young granddaughter who had been in the plane. Immediately, the air around us changed. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the warmth and life out of the moment. Everyone went silent, and I saw the color drain from the faces of the other responders. We knew what that meant. We knew the odds. Upon arriving at the crash site, any last shred of hope we had disappeared. The plane had been torn apart, its remains scattered among the trees and jagged rocks of the hillside. There was no chance anyone had survived. The wreckage was almost unrecognizable, crumpled and burned in places, shattered in others. A deep pit settled into my stomach, and I felt the world around me slow. No matter how many calls I had been on, no matter how much I had prepared myself for the worst, nothing could have braced me for this. Our team leader turned to us and spoke, his voice steady but soft. He said that if anyone felt uncomfortable recovering the bodies, there would be no judgment. Not everyone was built for this kind of work. Half of our team stepped away, choosing instead to assist with setting up rappelling lines and making radio calls to other teams stationed lower on the hillside. They would help us navigate through the broken trees and aircraft debris to where we expected to find the bodies. We moved slowly, carefully picking our way through the wreckage. The first thing I saw that truly hit me was a small stuffed teddy bear lying on the ground. It was soaked in blood, its fur matted and darkened. My breath hitched, and my grip on my harness tightened. I wanted to look away, but my eyes were locked onto that bear. That was when it truly settled in. This wasn't just a recovery mission. We were about to pull a child from this wreck. As we made our way further, the smell of fuel and burned metal filled my nose. It was acrid and heavy, clinging to the air like an invisible fog. The closer we got, the worse it became, a mixture of fuel, dirt, and something else, something I didn't want to think about. The world around me seemed to narrow. I didn't hear the rustling of leaves or the murmurs of my team. All I heard was my own breathing, heavy and uneven. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. And then we saw them. The elderly couple was slumped together near the remains of a wing, their bodies crumpled and broken. But what truly made me stop, what made my heart hammer against my ribs so hard it felt like it would break free, was the little girl. She was a few feet away, lying on her side, her empty, lifeless eyes staring off into nothing. Her small body was limp, her arms twisted in a way that no living person should be. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she had been calling for someone in her final moments. And just beside her, the teddy bear. It must have been in her arms when the plane went down. I felt an overwhelming wave of nausea roll through me. My chest was tight, my head felt like it was full of static. I had seen a lot in my time as an EMT. I had seen overdoses, suicides, car crashes, but this was different. This was something I knew would follow me for the rest of my life. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to stay steady. We had a job to do. We gathered ourselves, swallowing the grief and horror that threatened to consume us. With careful hands, we began the slow, painful process of recovering the bodies. We moved as gently as we could, knowing there was no comfort to be given to the dead, but wanting to show some small measure of respect. The girl's small frame felt almost weightless in my arms as I lifted her. Her skin was cold, too cold. I forced my mind to shut down, to focus on the task at hand. One step at a time. The hike back up to the staging area was long, longer than it should have been. Every step felt like dragging a boulder uphill, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. The radio crackled with updates from the teams below, but I barely heard them. My mind was trapped in a loop, replaying the sight of that little girl's empty eyes. I told myself to focus on the movement of my feet, the weight in my arms, the feeling of my own breath. Anything but that image. When we finally reached the top, we placed the bodies in the transport vehicles. No one spoke. The sheriff gave us a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the weight we carried. The family would have their answers now. They would have closure. But there was no relief in that. There was no victory here. I sat down on the back of one of the trucks, my legs shaking beneath me. Someone offered me a bottle of water, but I barely registered it. I stared at the ground, my hands gripping the edge of the truck so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the wreckage below. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt hollow. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. I saw the bear. I saw those empty, lifeless eyes staring back at me. I heard the silence, that suffocating, all-consuming silence that had swallowed the crash site whole. It stayed with me. It still does. I've been on many calls since then. I've seen more death, more tragedy. But nothing ever hit me the way that day did. Nothing ever reached into me and left a mark as deep as that. But I still do this work. Because if I don't, someone else has to. Someone else has to bear the weight of that grief, that numbness. And I don't ever want anyone else to experience it the way I did. Because no matter how heavy the burden, someone has to carry it. Vegas had always been one of those places people talked about like it was a whole different world. A place where you could let go, do things you'd never do anywhere else, and no one would ever know. When my friend's friend, let's call her Jessica, went there to blow off some steam, she wasn't expecting her trip to turn into something straight out of a nightmare. She arrived in Vegas ready to have a good time. The city was alive, buzzing with lights, music, and people who all seemed to be chasing something. A thrill, an escape, maybe even just the right amount of alcohol to make the night feel like a dream. She was looking for fun, nothing more. Just a few drinks, maybe some dancing, something to take her mind off the stress she had been dealing with. That's how she ended up in a club, the kind where the music pounds so hard you feel it in your chest. She wasn't alone, of course. Her friends were with her, all of them laughing and drinking, but at some point in the night, she found herself next to a guy who caught her attention. He was handsome in that effortless kind of way, dressed just well enough to look put together, but not like he was trying too hard. He had an easy smile, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the noise just enough for her to hear. He seemed charming, confident, the kind of guy you meet on a night like this and let yourself have fun with, because why not? She spent the whole night with him, dancing, talking, making out in dark corners of the club. He made her laugh, held her close when the music slowed, but when he asked her to come home with him, she hesitated. That wasn't her thing. She wasn't the type to follow a stranger to his place, no matter how good-looking or charming he was. She declined, but they exchanged numbers, making loose plans to see each other again before she left Vegas. It felt exciting, like the kind of thing you'd remember fondly later. She didn't think much about him after that night. Vegas was a blur of bright lights and late nights, and she was too busy having fun to sit around waiting for his texts. A couple of days passed, and then something strange happened. She woke up one morning and noticed a soreness around her lips, the kind you get when you're coming down with something. At first, she brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just irritation from the dry desert air, or maybe even from the drinks she had been having. But as the day went on, the soreness turned into something worse. The skin around her mouth started to feel raw, almost like a burn, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw small sores beginning to form. By the next morning, it was worse. The sores had grown, spreading across her lips and down toward her chin. They were red and inflamed, and no amount of washing or ointment seemed to help. It looked infected, and the pain had grown sharper, like something was eating away at her skin. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She needed to see a doctor. At the clinic, the doctor examined her closely, his expression shifting as he studied the wounds. He asked her a few questions. Had she been in contact with anything unusual? Had she eaten anything strange? Had she kissed anyone recently? When she told him about the guy at the club, something in his face changed. He stepped out of the room for a moment, then returned looking more serious than before. The test results came back quickly. It wasn't just an infection. It was a strain of bacteria so rare that the doctor had only heard of it in medical reports. A flesh-eating bacteria, something that wasn't supposed to show up in ordinary circumstances. But that wasn't even the worst part. The strain was one that had only ever been found in people who had consumed human flesh. She couldn't process what she was hearing. It didn't make sense. The doctor kept talking, explaining things about bacteria and transmission, but her mind was stuck on that one horrifying detail. Consumed human flesh. How? Where? Why? The only person she had kissed recently was the guy from the club. That realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. The doctor must have seen the horror on her face because he asked her for his name, if she had any way to contact him. She still had his number. She had been planning to meet up with him again. Her fingers shook as she handed over her phone. The police got involved fast. Too fast. As if they had been waiting for something like this. They traced the number, found his address, and when they got to his apartment, what they found inside was worse than anything she could have imagined. Body parts. In the fridge. In the freezer. Some wrapped in plastic. Some in containers. Some barely recognizable as human anymore. He hadn't just been meeting women at clubs. He had been bringing them home, and they hadn't been leaving. The police said he was calm when they arrested him, eerily calm, like he didn't see anything wrong with what he had been doing. He smiled for his mugshot. No sign of remorse, no regret in his eyes. Just the same easy confidence he had when he first walked up to her at the club. Like none of it was real to him. Like it was all just another night in Vegas. She never heard from him again, of course. But that didn't mean she ever forgot. The scars on her face eventually healed, but they left behind faint reminders of what had happened. Lines that would always be there no matter how much time passed. And every time she looked in the mirror, she remembered how close she had come to being one of those women who never made it out of his apartment. After that, she never went home with a guy again. Never even considered it. Because you never really know who you're meeting. Not in a place like that. Not anywhere. About 4 years ago, I woke up late one morning on my day off. It was 10:21. I remember that time so clearly because what happened next has been burned into my memory ever since. I sat up in bed, stretched and yawned. It was one of those mornings where you wake up slowly, enjoying the warmth of the blankets for a few minutes before dragging yourself up. Eventually, I pushed the covers off and swung my legs over the side of the bed, rubbing my face as I tried to shake off the grogginess. The sunlight filtering through my blinds cast striped shadows across the floor, and the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I got up, made my way to the bathroom, and went through my usual routine. I used the toilet, washed my hands, splashed some water on my face, and brushed my teeth. I lingered in the bathroom for a bit longer than necessary, enjoying the warmth of the air. It was one of those cool mornings, and I wasn't in a hurry to get out of the cozy bathroom. Eventually, I got dressed, throwing on a t-shirt and some sweatpants, and headed back to my bedroom. When I picked up my phone, I glanced at the time again, expecting it to be somewhere around 10:35 or later. But it said 10:25. That caught my attention. I frowned and looked at the digital alarm clock on my bedside table, the same one I had looked at when I first woke up. It also said 10:25. I knew it had taken me longer than 4 minutes to get out of bed, use the bathroom, and get dressed. I had spent a good amount of time standing in front of the sink brushing my teeth and just zoning out, but I shrugged it off. Maybe I had misread the clock when I first woke up. It wouldn't be the first time I groggily misread numbers in the morning. I made my way downstairs and into the kitchen. The house was still and quiet, the way it always was when I was home alone. I turned on the PC and then the TV, letting the morning news play in the background while I started making breakfast. I decided to heat up some leftover rice from the night before, so I grabbed the container from the fridge and opened the microwave. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The time on the microwave was 10:25. I stood there, staring at it. That was weird. Really weird. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and checked the time again. It still said 10:25. There was no way. No way I had woken up, gone to the bathroom, gotten dressed, walked downstairs, turned on the PC, turned on the TV, and started preparing breakfast all in under a minute. That was impossible. I felt an uncomfortable prickling at the back of my neck. Something was wrong. To make sure I wasn't just imagining things, I decided to watch the microwave clock and count to 60. If the time didn't change, then I'd know something was really messed up. I stood there, staring at the glowing red numbers, counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3. It felt like the longest count of my life. Around 20 seconds in, the clock finally changed to 10:26. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Okay, so the clocks weren't completely frozen. They were just behaving strangely. I shook my head, trying to push away the growing unease, and finished making my breakfast. Once I had everything plated up, I took my food over to the PC and sat down in front of the screen. The familiar glow of the monitor was comforting, something normal in the middle of this weird morning. But when I glanced at the bottom right corner of the screen, my stomach clenched again. The time on the PC said 10:20. I stared at it. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. That didn't make any sense. Just minutes ago, I had been watching the microwave clock count up to 10:26, but now the PC was telling me it was 10:20. That wasn't possible. With a shaking hand, I pulled out my phone again. My phone also said 10:20. That was when I started writing everything down. I needed to document this because I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. I opened a notepad on my computer and typed everything I could remember, my fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard as I tried to make sense of what was happening. As I sat there, I kept checking the clock on my PC. The seconds ticked by normally while I watched. 10:21, 10:22. It seemed fine as long as I was looking at it. But the moment I looked away, even for a minute, things got weird again. At one point, about 15 minutes later, I glanced back at the screen and saw that the time had jumped backward to 10:14. My phone also read 10:14. I felt a tightness in my chest. This wasn't just a malfunctioning clock. This wasn't something I could explain away easily. A few minutes later, the time changed again. 10:13. Then, moments later, it was back in the 10:20s. It was like time was slipping, shifting around me in ways that didn't make any sense. For what felt like an hour, maybe an hour and a half, I sat there watching the clocks. Sometimes they moved forward normally. Other times they jumped back. But eventually, they seemed to stabilize. After that, everything went back to normal. The clocks started working the way they should. My phone, my PC, the microwave, they all stayed consistent. I checked multiple online clocks, and they all matched up. Whatever had been happening, it had stopped. I never experienced anything like that again. To this day, I don't have an explanation for it. I wasn't sleep deprived. I wasn't on any medication. There was no logical reason why time should have behaved that way. But it did. And every time I think back to that morning, I remember one thing with absolute clarity. I woke up at 10:21. I was running my cable route in the inner city. Another long day of jumping between jobs, navigating traffic, and dealing with customers who either barely noticed I was there or treated me like I was personally responsible for all their internet issues. It wasn't the worst job in the world, but days like this, when every little thing seemed to slow me down, made me wish I had picked something else. Between jobs, it hit me. That gut-wrenching, all-consuming, no-warning feeling in my stomach that told me I needed a bathroom. Not in a little while. Not when it was convenient. Now, I clenched up, looking around in desperation. The closest Quick Trip was at least 5 miles away, and with city traffic, that might as well have been light years. I didn't have the luxury of time. I needed the nearest restroom, and I needed it immediately. I spotted a small, run-down gas station just ahead. The kind of place that you only stop at when you have no other choice. Paint peeling off the side, a single flickering neon sign that buzzed more than it glowed, and a parking lot full of cars that looked like they hadn't moved in years. But at that moment, I didn't care. If they had a working toilet, they were my savior. I pulled in and rushed inside. The store smelled like old coffee and something greasy. Shelves were lined with expired snacks and faded magazines that looked untouched for years. But I wasn't here to browse. My eyes immediately locked onto the door in the back with a faded restroom sign above it. There was a line. Of course, there was a line. A man in his 40s stood at the front, shifting from foot to foot, looking annoyed but calm. A woman around my age stood behind him, arms crossed, sighing every few seconds as if that would make the person inside hurry up. And then there was me, trying to keep a straight face while my insides were threatening to betray me. We made small talk. The usual meaningless stuff you say when you're forced to stand in line with strangers. I barely processed any of it, too focused on keeping everything under control. Minutes dragged by like hours, and I was getting desperate. Then everything changed. The man at the front of the line, the one who had seemed impatient but otherwise normal, suddenly let out a guttural, inhuman screech and lunged at the bathroom door. He yanked at the handle, shaking the entire frame, pounding on it with his fists. The woman inside screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "What the hell?" The woman next to me gasped, backing away. I stepped forward instinctively, my mind struggling to process what was happening. 1 second, we were just 3 strangers waiting in line, and now this guy was acting like he was possessed. I was about to tell him to calm the hell down when his entire body jerked, as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes rolled back, and his legs gave out. I barely managed to catch him before he hit the floor. His body convulsed violently in my arms. His face twisted, mouth foaming, limbs thrashing uncontrollably. But what froze me in place, what truly shook me to my core, were his eyes. Tears of blood streamed down his face, staining his skin, pooling in the corners of his eyes like something out of a nightmare. I had just been talking to him. He was just a guy in line for the bathroom. And now this. The bathroom door opened, and an older woman stepped out, wide-eyed. She didn't hesitate. "He's having a seizure. Lay him on his side. Don't hold him down." She barked orders like she had done this 1,000 times before. I later found out she was a retired nurse. What were the odds? In a gas station bathroom of all places. Time stretched into something unreal. The seizure felt like it lasted forever, but it must have been just a few minutes. People gathered, some trying to help, others just standing there, staring. By the time the paramedics arrived, his body had finally gone still, his breathing ragged but steady. His wife arrived not long after. She was frantic but not entirely surprised. Turns out, the guy was an alcoholic, and his drinking was tied to his epilepsy. He had been waiting in line not just for the bathroom, but for a chance to sneak a drink from a flask hidden in his coat. His body had betrayed him in the worst way possible. I sat on the floor for a moment after they took him away, my heart pounding, my mind still catching up. The woman who had been in line with me looked pale, shaken. When I told her it was her turn to use the bathroom, she just shook her head and walked out of the store without another word. I, on the other hand, had no choice. I stepped into the dingy, foul-smelling restroom, locked the door behind me, and sat down. And I took the most relieved, most contemplative, most well-earned shit of my entire life. It wasn't until I walked back out into the gas station, past the scattered bystanders and the fading sound of sirens, that the full weight of it all hit me. I had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place at the right time. I still don't know. But I do know one thing. I'll never look at a gas station bathroom line the same way again. I was about 10 or 11 years old when I stayed homesick from school one day. My parents both worked and couldn't take the day off, so they told me to just stay in the house, keep the doors locked, and not answer the door for anyone. The usual talks about strangers and being careful ran through my head as I sat on the couch in the front room, wrapped in a blanket, watching TV. The front room had a big bay window that looked out onto the main road. Across the street, there was a row of small shops, a convenience store, a hairdresser, a bakery, and a post office. The road was always busy, with cars passing and people walking along the sidewalk. I felt a bit exposed sitting there, knowing that anyone walking by could see me. After a while, it made me uncomfortable, so I got up and pulled the curtains closed just enough to block most of the window, but still leave a small gap, so I could peek outside if I wanted. As I pulled the curtain, I saw a man walking past the house. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with a beard, glasses, and a green knitted jumper. Something about him seemed strange, though I couldn't quite explain why. He didn't do anything at that moment, just walked past at a normal pace. I watched him disappear down the street and thought nothing more of it until, about 10 minutes later, he walked past again, going in the same direction. It was odd. There wasn't much reason for someone to loop around the block like that, unless they were waiting for something or someone. It put me on edge, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he lived nearby or was just taking a walk. Still, I made sure the curtains were drawn enough that I could sit back on the couch without feeling like I was being watched. Another 10 minutes passed. Then he appeared again. This time, he stopped at the edge of the driveway. He stood there for about 30 seconds, staring at the house, or more specifically, at the window. My stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. He wasn't just passing by this time. He was watching. Then, he walked up the driveway. I felt frozen, my heart pounding as I watched him approach the front door. He walked slowly, looking into the window as he passed, trying to see inside. The house was an old Victorian sandstone home with big storm doors on the front, doors that needed a key to open. He knocked a few times, firm but not aggressive. I sat still, holding my breath. A part of me wanted to believe it was a mistake, that he was maybe at the wrong house, looking for someone else. But deep down, I knew better. Something inside me screamed not to move, not to make a sound. Then, he banged on the window. I jumped. The glass rattled with the force of his knocking. He was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath shallow. I wanted to believe he would just go away, that he would realize no one was home and leave. But as I sat there, I saw the moment he realized something. There was a back door. Panic shot through me like ice water. The back door. My parents never locked it during the day, so the dog could come in and out. He was going to try it. I moved faster than I ever had in my life. I darted out of the front room, through the hallway, and into the kitchen where the back door was. Just as I turned the key and locked it, the handle started to turn. He was already there. I dropped to the floor, curling into a ball against the cabinets. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep them over my mouth to stifle my breathing. He started banging on the door, harder this time, rattling the frame. The sound echoed through the house. Then he moved to the windows. I heard the faint creak of the porch as he tried to open them, checking each one. I stayed there on the cold floor, too scared to move, my body rigid with fear. Time stretched endlessly. Every bang, every sound made my stomach twist tighter. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, so loud I thought he might hear it too. Minutes passed. Then more. I don't know how long he stayed, but it felt like forever. He tried different windows, rattling them, pushing on them. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, willing him to leave, praying he would get bored, that someone would walk by and scare him off. And then silence. I didn't move. I waited, barely breathing. I wanted to believe he was gone, but I was too afraid to check. I stayed curled up on the floor for what felt like hours, every small noise making me jump. When I finally built up the courage to move, I crawled across the floor and peeked out from the edge of the window. The driveway was empty. The street was empty. He was gone. I didn't cry. I was too shaken to even process what had just happened. My body felt heavy, exhausted. I stayed in the kitchen, sitting on the floor with my back against the cabinets, waiting for my parents to come home. When they did, I didn't know how to tell them what had happened. I felt like if I said it out loud, it would make it real. But I had to. My mom's face went pale as I explained, and my dad immediately checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow outside my window felt like him. Every small noise made my stomach twist. The thought that kept running through my head, over and over, was simple but terrifying. If I hadn't remembered to lock the back door, he would have gotten inside. The next day, my parents changed the locks. They made sure every door and window had new, strong locks that couldn't be easily opened. And from that day forward, the back door was never left unlocked, not even for a second. I never saw the man again. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I know, deep in my gut, that he wasn't just looking for someone to talk to. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was looking for a way inside. And I don't want to think about what would have happened if he had found one. The house was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears and makes even the faintest noise stand out. My dad and my auntie sat in the waiting room at the front of the house, just outside my grandparents' bedroom. Inside that room, my great-grandfather lay in his final moments, his breath shallow, his presence a fragile thread stretched too thin. The waiting room was dimly lit by a single overhead light, casting dull shadows on the furniture, the walls, and the wooden floor. The room itself was simple, with a few chairs against the walls, a small table stacked with newspapers, and a sturdy wooden door that led to the front garden. There were two other exits, one to the rest of the house and another leading directly into my grandparents' bedroom. My dad and my auntie sat close together, neither speaking, just waiting, listening to the faint, labored breaths from the other side of the door. There was no breeze that night. The air felt heavy, still, thick with the scent of aged wood, and the faintest hint of my great-grandfather's medicines drifting from the bedroom. My auntie shivered and rubbed her arms, despite the warmth of the room. She got up, walked over to the door leading to the garden, and pushed it firmly shut. It had been slightly ajar before, but only enough to let in a sliver of the night. With a twist of the key, she locked it. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the only disruption in the hush that had settled over the house. She sat back down next to my dad. Minutes passed. Time seemed to stretch. Every second felt elongated, drawn out as they waited for what they both knew was coming. The house felt heavier, as if the very walls were bracing for something unseen, something inevitable. Then it happened. My grandmother's wail pierced the silence, raw and filled with grief. The sound tore through the house, sharp and immediate, breaking through the quiet like shattered glass. At that exact moment, the wooden door that my auntie had just locked flung open with a force that shook the walls. It wasn't just a gentle push, not a breeze shifting it open. It was violent, aggressive. The door swung outwards, as though someone on the inside had shoved it open in anger. The movement was precise, deliberate, the kind of motion a person would make when storming out of a room in rage. The door slammed back against the exterior wall with a resounding thud that echoed through the night. For a heartbeat, everything was still again, the air suddenly charged, tense, as if the house itself had just exhaled. My dad and my auntie sat frozen, staring at the door, at the emptiness beyond it. There was nothing there. No footsteps. No movement. Just the darkened front yard stretching out into the night. The door, heavy and solid, swayed slightly before coming to a rest. A strange pressure lingered in the air, something neither of them could explain. The locked door, the one that had been shut just moments before, was now wide open, as if someone had forced their way through it with purpose. My dad felt his breath catch in his throat. His pulse pounded against his ribs, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just seen. He turned to look at my auntie. She was already looking at him, her face pale, her hands gripping the sides of the chair, as if holding onto something solid would keep her grounded. They both knew. Without a word, without even needing to ask, they both knew what had just happened. The timing was too perfect, too precise. The moment their great-grandfather had drawn his last breath, something had left the house, something had made its exit known. In the days that followed, they tried to rationalize it. They checked the door again and again. It was in perfect working order, no loose hinges, no faulty latch. There was no wind that night, not even the faintest gust that could have moved it, let alone with such force. No one else had been near it. No one had touched it. Their mother, still deep in mourning, refused to acknowledge it. She told them to stop talking about it, that it was just a coincidence, that grief plays tricks on the mind. But my dad and my auntie knew better. They had seen it, had felt it, had heard the unmistakable force with which the door had been thrown open and slammed shut. Years passed, and they never found an explanation. They spoke of it only in quiet moments, always with the same details, always with the same certainty. No embellishments, no dramatics, just the memory of that night, of the heavy air, the stillness, the wail of their mother, and the door that had opened in a way that no natural force could explain. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't some fairy tale whisper of spirits lingering in the home. It was real. It happened, and neither of them ever forgot it. We were finally done. After 4 grueling years of late-night studying, exams, and stress, we were officially college graduates. It felt surreal. We had been planning this trip for months, just my friend and I, driving from our Midwest home all the way down to Florida, celebrating our freedom before we had to step into the real world. We had no real plans, just the open road and the excitement of something new. Atlanta was our first stop. We got in late, exhausted from the drive, but still eager to experience the city. We found a dive bar, the Highlander, tucked away in a strip mall. Nothing fancy, but exactly the kind of place we wanted. A few drinks in, we were feeling good, laughing at how we barely made it out of school in one piece. That's when they approached us. A guy and his girlfriend, probably around our age, started chatting with us outside the bar. Friendly, casual. The usual small talk. Where are you from? Where'd you graduate? What are you doing in Atlanta? We found out they were from Rockford, Illinois, and had just graduated too. It felt like one of those random travel encounters where you meet people for a few minutes, connect over something small, and then never see them again. We all laughed about how weird it was that 2 groups from the Midwest randomly met in Atlanta. They seemed nice, normal. Eventually, we were ready to move on to another bar, and they were heading back to their hotel. We watched as they walked to their car, a sleek black 2005 BMW Z4 convertible. The Chicago Bears decal on the back stood out, and I remember joking about how you couldn't go anywhere without running into Bears fans. We waved as they pulled off, their taillights disappearing into the city traffic. And that was it. The next morning, we woke up hungover as hell. The cheap motel room reeked of alcohol and stale air. My head was pounding, and I could barely stomach the thought of food, but we needed to get moving. We had a long drive ahead of us, and Florida was waiting. I don't even remember checking out of the motel or getting into the car. Everything was a blur until we hit I-75. The traffic started thickening about an hour into the drive. At first, we thought it was just typical congestion, but it wasn't letting up. Stop and go, bumper to bumper. Time dragged. The sun was brutal, turning the car into an oven. The air conditioning barely kept up. We sat in silence, both of us too miserable to talk. Minutes turned into an hour. The frustration in the air was thick. We just wanted to keep moving. Then, finally, we saw what was causing the holdup. A 1-car accident. People slowed to rubberneck, the way they always do. It wasn't until we got closer that the details became clear. A black BMW Z4. I remember the feeling in my stomach before my brain even caught up. My friend exhaled sharply, but neither of us spoke. The car was on its side, crushed, the windshield shattered, the hood twisted and bent in ways that didn't make sense. Its top was down, exposing the crumpled interior. The Chicago Bears decal was still there. 2 blue tarps lay on the ground next to the wreck. One large, one small. And then I saw it. Her arm, just outside of one of the tarps, completely uncovered. The pale skin streaked with dirt. Fingers curled slightly, like she had been reaching for something in those final moments. The sight of it sent a wave of nausea through me. My breath felt tight, my chest heavy. I tried to look away, but it was burned into my mind. I knew it was her. I knew it was them. I didn't even remember their names. Traffic slowly moved again, and we kept driving, but everything felt different. The hangover, the excitement for the trip, the plans we made, it all felt so far away now. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. I couldn't stop picturing them, alive and laughing just hours ago, and now gone. Just like that. We drove in silence for miles, neither of us knowing what to say. What was there to say? I kept thinking about the small things, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed, how he casually leaned against the car while talking. They had mentioned wanting to get married, but hadn't been engaged yet. Would they have gotten married? Had kids? What were they even doing in Atlanta? We would never know. We didn't stop for food. We didn't stop for anything. Just kept driving. The excitement of the trip had vanished. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that arm, that wreckage. the blue tarps. We made it to Florida, but it wasn't the trip we thought it would be. The whole time, I felt like I was waiting for something. Some sign that what we saw wasn't real, that it was some mistake, that we had just imagined it. But it was real. Too real. Years have passed, but I still think about them. About how easily we could have been in that car instead. About how one wrong turn, 1 second of bad luck, can change everything. I don't know why we met them that night. Maybe it was nothing, just a coincidence. But sometimes, I wonder if we were meant to meet them, just so someone would remember. Because I do. I remember everything. I used to work as a cleaner at my school after class. It wasn't a big job, just a few hours each evening, making sure the classrooms were tidy, wiping down the desks, emptying the bins. The money wasn't great, but at 16, I didn't need much. Just enough for a few things here and there, and I liked the independence of having my own cash. By the time I finished my shift and walked home, the streets were always quiet. Most students had already made their way home hours before, and even the teachers had mostly cleared out. The streetlights buzzed softly, casting long shadows on the pavement. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet, the stillness of the world as I walked alone, taking the same route each evening. One night, about halfway home, I noticed a man walking behind me. Not close, but close enough that I could tell he was heading in the same direction. He wasn't rushing, wasn't making any obvious effort to catch up with me, but something about him felt off. His face looked strange, like it was made of plastic, too smooth, too unnatural. His expression never changed. He had this slight, almost polite smile, like he was amused by something no one else could see. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just some guy walking home, maybe heading in the same direction. But still, I walked a little faster, my heart beating just a bit harder. For a couple of weeks, I didn't see him again, and I stopped thinking about it. Then one evening, there he was. Same distance, same slow, steady walk behind me. Same plasticky, unsettling smile. After that, I saw him every single day. It didn't matter if I left school a little earlier or a little later. He was always there. Not too close, not too far, just there. I never told anyone. If I told my parents, they'd start driving me to school and picking me up every day. And I didn't want that. I was 16. That wasn't cool. I started changing my route, trying to see if he was actually following me or if it was just some weird coincidence. But no matter which streets I turned onto, no matter how I tried to shake him, he always reappeared. If I took a different way, he was there. If I stopped at a shop for a few minutes, he was there when I came out. Always the same distance, always the same plastic smile. One weekend, I was walking to my friend's house. The route was similar to the one I took home from school, and I wasn't even thinking about him. But as I turned onto the main road, my eyes landed on a white minibus parked at the bottom of the street. Something about it caught my attention. The windows were slightly tinted, but I could see the outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. I swear to God, it was him. He was just sitting there, staring at me through the glass. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself it wasn't him. It couldn't be. But I couldn't shake the feeling, and as I kept walking, I pulled out my phone and called my friend. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just needed to do something, anything, to make myself feel less alone. I made it obvious that I was on the phone, speaking loudly so that if he was watching, he'd know someone knew where I was. I thought that might scare him off, make him stop. It didn't. A few minutes later, I glanced back. He was behind me, 2 meters away. That same slow, steady walk. That same smile. I felt my stomach drop. I picked up my pace. So did he. I could hear his footsteps matching mine, never getting closer, never falling behind. My friend was still on the phone. I told her to open her front door and wait for me. I didn't care if I sounded panicked. I didn't care if she thought I was crazy. I just needed to get to her house. I turned the last corner and saw her house in the distance. Her front door was open, just a little, just enough for me to run inside. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. As soon as I reached the door, I pushed inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to be sick. My friend stared at me, asking me what was wrong, but I couldn't get the words out. I just pointed at the window. He was there, standing outside, hands at his sides, staring in through the glass. Smiling. He didn't knock. He didn't try to get in. He just stood there, watching. For 2 hours. We stayed inside, curtains drawn, barely speaking. My friend wanted to call the police, but I told her no. What would I even say? That some guy followed me home and stood outside for a while? That's not a crime. After 2 hours, he just walked away. After that night, I never saw him again. But the minibus? It never left. Years later, after I had moved away, I went back to visit my parents. As I walked through my old neighborhood, I passed by that street again. The same minibus was still parked there. Same spot. Same angle. Like it had never moved. I didn't look inside. I didn't want to know if he was still sitting there, smiling, watching, waiting. It was around last year. We had a friend that went missing for almost a week. His name was Kevin. We weren't really that close, just the kind of friends that occasionally ran into each other on campus or at parties. But when the news started spreading, everything changed. Kevin lived in one of the dorms on campus. I didn't really notice he was missing until that night when my housemates saw a report on the university's Facebook page. It said that 2 bodies had been found in a spring at the far edge of campus. Our university was built right next to a mountain, and that area, the springs, was a place people barely went to unless they were looking for trouble or adventure. At first, it was just a weird piece of news. Nobody thought much of it. But then, someone in our house put the pieces together. Kevin hadn't been around, and people had been looking for him. That's when it really hit us. We started scrambling, checking messages, and making calls. When the first reports of the victims' identities came in, we were stunned. One of the bodies was Kevin. They had misspelled his last name in the report, but we knew it was him. The entire atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just another campus incident anymore. It was real, and it was close. My housemates and I rushed out to meet his dorm mates, and I started calling people. Some of our friends went straight to the springs to see if there was anything they could find, but by the time they got there, the police had already taken the bodies away for autopsy. There was nothing we could do except wait for more information, stuck in this horrible state of limbo. As the details trickled in, the story became clearer. Kevin and another guy had gone swimming in the springs the weekend before. They never made it back. The area around the springs was known for being unpredictable. It looked calm on the surface, but the water was deep and freezing, and the rocks were covered in slippery moss. The water came down from the mountain, running through unseen caves and cracks. If you didn't know what you were doing, it was easy to get caught in an undercurrent or to cramp up from the cold. No one had found them until days later, when their bloated bodies floated up to the surface. By then, the decay had set in, and crustaceans had already started feeding on their skin. It was bad. The news reports said they looked like they had been whipped, covered in lashes and torn flesh. At first, rumors spread that it had been some kind of frat initiation gone horribly wrong. But eventually, the police ruled it an accident. They had drowned. That was all. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of how brutal it was. The thought of them trapped under the water, unseen for days, their bodies slowly deteriorating, was sickening. I kept picturing Kevin underwater, his limbs limp, his mouth slightly open, his skin becoming soft and pale in the darkness. The idea of drowning terrified me more than anything. The way your lungs burn for air, the way panic takes over, the sheer helplessness of it. His dorm mates were a mess. We all were. It wasn't like he had just disappeared and been found dead. He had been right there, lost under the water, while the rest of us went about our lives as if nothing had happened. Classes continued, people laughed in the cafeteria, and life just moved on while his body decomposed beneath the surface. That thought stayed with me. How many other things were hiding beneath the surface, unnoticed? The university held a small memorial for him. A lot of people showed up, even those who barely knew him. It was strange, seeing everyone gathered, dressed in black, whispering about the tragedy. Some people cried, but most just stood in silence. I didn't know what to feel. I wasn't one of his best friends, but I had known him enough that his death left a hollow space in my mind. He had been here, and now he wasn't. His parents came. That was the hardest part. They looked exhausted, like they had cried so much there was nothing left. His mother didn't speak much. She just sat there, staring at the framed photo of him they had placed on the table. After the memorial, things slowly started to settle. People stopped talking about it as much, and the campus went back to normal. But I kept thinking about Kevin. I kept thinking about how easy it was to vanish, how one moment you could be here, laughing with your friends, and the next you could be gone. I kept thinking about how the world didn't stop for anyone, no matter how much it should. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about those 5 days when he was missing. While we were watching movies, eating dinner, walking across campus, he had been in the water, slowly drifting. The image of him in that cold, dark place stuck with me, and I don't think it will ever leave. R.I.P. Kevin. I moved in with my grandparents at the start of my first semester of college. My grandmother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and with my grandfather getting older, I wanted to help where I could. The doctors gave her 2 months to live, but she pushed through, holding on for 9 months before she finally passed. It wasn't easy. Watching her body grow frail, listening to her labored breathing at night, feeling the weight of the inevitable. I spent most of my time at home when I wasn't in class, taking on tasks my grandfather couldn't handle alone, helping her in and out of bed, preparing food she rarely had the appetite to eat, making sure she took her medication. The house smelled like antiseptic and old wooden furniture, the air heavy with something I couldn't describe. Grief mixed with time, maybe. After she passed, the house felt different, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't empty, not exactly. It was quieter, yes, but something else lingered. I noticed it first when I was alone, sitting at the desk in the small computer room where I'd go to study. The old chair creaked beneath me as I leaned forward, typing out notes, when I felt something behind me. Not just a sense, not paranoia. It was a presence. The way the air shifted, how the room seemed to hold its breath. I turned my head slightly, not expecting to see anything, but there she was. Or at least I thought I saw her. Just the outline, a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, like she was sitting on the bed behind me watching. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned fully, but the bed was empty. The blankets were still smoothed out, undisturbed. I shook it off. I was grieving. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. That's what I told myself, anyway. It didn't stop there. I'd walk through the hallway and catch a shape moving ahead of me, a familiar figure just out of reach, disappearing around the corner before I could get a proper look. The first few times, I felt my stomach drop, my pulse quicken, but it never felt threatening. Just unexpected. I never told my grandfather. He had enough on his mind, and I wasn't sure how he'd take it. Maybe he felt it too. Maybe he just didn't talk about it. Months passed, and I started pushing those moments to the back of my mind. Life moved on. I still lived with my grandfather, though I spent more time out of the house. One evening, a girl I had been dating came over. We weren't serious, just spending time together, getting to know each other. She waited for me inside while I went out to the garage to grab something. I don't even remember what. The laundry room was connected to the garage, so when I came back in, she was standing there, waiting for me. We hugged briefly, a casual embrace, but then we both heard it. The sound of paws on tile. Fast, light but distinct. A dog running through the house. The nails clicking against the floor as it moved, the rhythm unmistakable. At first, I thought my grandfather had gotten a new dog without telling me. But then I remembered, he hadn't owned a dog in years. And the sound was coming from inside the house, getting closer. I barely had time to process it before we saw it. A blur of motion, a shape rounding the corner at full speed. It ran straight toward us, right between our legs. A flash of fur, a body moving too fast to fully register before it vanished into the garage. Through the closed door. My heart was pounding, my mind trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The girl in front of me was frozen, staring at the same spot. We didn't say anything, just stood there, absorbing what had happened. Then slowly, she looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. We left after that. I didn't talk about it for a long time. I didn't know how. What was there to say? It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination. We both saw it. The same thing, the same way. The more I thought about it, the more I started piecing things together. My grandparents had owned a dog when I was little, a dog that had passed away when I was just 2 years old. I had no memories of it, only pictures. A golden retriever, always lying at my grandmother's feet, always in the background of old family photos. I never saw the dog again. I never saw my grandmother again, either, not in the hallways, not sitting behind me in the computer room. Maybe I had let go. Maybe they had. Or maybe I just stopped paying attention. The house sat just a few yards away from the beach, a modest, weathered home with salt-stained windows and an aging wooden deck that creaked underfoot. My parents had been invited to stay for a few nights at their friend's beach house, a little getaway to escape the stress of work and city life. It was an offer they had accepted without hesitation. A chance to listen to the waves at night, to sit on the deck with coffee in the morning, to breathe in the salt air. It sounded perfect. But there was always something off about the house next door. Their friends had mentioned it before, always in passing, always vague. 5 different owners in 3 years. That alone was strange. A house in a place like this should have been a dream, a forever home, not a revolving door of owners who seemed to flee as quickly as they arrived. The most recent owner had died only weeks before my parents' visit. Suicide, they said. A tragedy. No one seemed to know why, and no one seemed interested in asking too many questions. The first day of their trip was uneventful. They arrived in the early afternoon, unpacked their bags, settled in. The house was cozy and familiar, a place they had visited before, but this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the light seemed dimmer than it should have been, even though the weather was clear. Maybe it was the silence that settled in once the sun started going down, an almost unnatural stillness. My dad couldn't put his finger on it, but it was there, a feeling just beneath the surface. That night, they went through their usual routine, made dinner, sat on the deck for a while, then got ready for bed. It wasn't until my dad was brushing his teeth that he smelled it. Gas. Faint, but unmistakable. He turned off the sink and sniffed the air again. It was stronger now. He followed it through the house, checking the stove, the fireplace. Nothing seemed out of place, but the smell lingered. He knew better than to ignore it. Gas leaks weren't something you played around with. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The air was cooler than he expected, a sharp contrast to the warm night inside. He walked around the side of the house, following the smell, the flashlight beam bouncing along the ground. The feeling came over him quickly, an unease that made his skin prickle. He'd been outside alone a million times before, in all kinds of places, but this was different. It wasn't just being alone. It was the way the night pressed in on him, the way the silence felt heavier than it should have. He found the gas shut off and knelt down to turn it off. The metal was cold under his fingers. Just as he was about to finish, he heard it. A voice, right behind him. Clear. Distinct. "What are you doing?" It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't distant. It was close, like someone standing just behind his shoulder. Without thinking, he answered, shutting off the gas. As soon as the words left his mouth, he froze. The air around him felt wrong, heavier. The hair on his arms stood up. He turned his head slowly, heart pounding, expecting. What? Someone standing there? A trick of his own imagination? But there was nothing. Just the empty stretch of yard between the house and the one next door. He swung the flashlight around, scanning the area. Nothing moved. No one was there. His first thought was my mom. Maybe she had followed him outside. Maybe she had asked him the question. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't her voice. And when he turned and ran back inside, she was exactly where he had left her, in the bathroom, brushing her teeth, completely unaware that anything had happened. My dad didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt like someone was watching him. Every creak of the house made his skin crawl. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, that it was just his imagination running wild, but the feeling wouldn't go away. At some point, he gave up on trying to sleep altogether. By 3 a.m., he woke my mom up and told her they were leaving. She didn't argue. She could see it in his face. Whatever had happened, it had shaken him. They packed their bags in silence and were on the road before the sun even started to rise. The next day, they told their friends what had happened. My dad expected them to laugh, to tell him he was being ridiculous. Instead, they looked at each other, their expressions darkening. When they spoke, their voices were quiet, hesitant. The man who had lived next door, the one who had died 3 weeks earlier, he had killed himself with gas. He had turned it on inside the house, sealed the windows, and never woke up. My dad doesn't tell this story often. When he does, it's always the same. The way his voice tightens, the way his hands shake just a little. He's not the kind of man who believes in things he can't explain. But he knows what he heard. He knows how it felt. And that's enough. They haven't been back since. I was living in this apartment in Oslo that just had this weird vibe. It was an old building, built in the mid-1800s. The ceilings were high, the walls thick, and the floors creaked underfoot no matter how lightly you stepped. The place had character, that much was clear. But there was something else, too, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. There were 3 of us living there, 2 girls and I. We had all been friends before moving in together, but even that familiarity didn't help much with the feeling that the apartment gave me. From the first day, I just felt like something was off. It wasn't anything I could explain. There wasn't anything obvious, like shadows moving or strange whispers in the night. It was just this constant sense of unease, like something in the walls was watching. The air always felt a little heavy, like it was pressing down on you, making it hard to relax. I never felt at home there, not really. One of the rooms, in particular, made me uncomfortable. I hated going in there. It was smaller than the others, and there was something about it that made my skin crawl. The rest of the apartment could be warm and cozy, even in the dead of winter, but that room was always cold. No matter how high we turned up the heat, no matter if we kept the door shut or open, it was like the warmth just refused to settle in there. It wasn't just the temperature that got to me, though. Every time I stepped inside, this wave of thoughts would rush into my head. Thoughts of children crying, of being scared, of something unseen hovering over them. It didn't make any sense. I had no reason to think about that kind of thing, but in that room, it was all I could think about. I would stand in the doorway, staring into the dim light, and I could almost hear it. I never stayed in there for very long. My room was the old living room, bigger than the others. The ceilings were even higher in there, making it feel strange, too open, like I was too small for the space. The windows stretched almost from the floor to the ceiling, and sometimes at night, when I was lying in bed, I felt like they were pulling me toward them, like something wanted me to look outside. I never did. I kept the curtains shut tight, even though I told myself I was just being paranoid. One morning, I woke up to this sound, something low and guttural like a growl. It was deep, like the sound a big cat or a snarling dog would make, but there was nothing there. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, like something was pinning me down. I could breathe, but I couldn't move a single muscle, couldn't even turn my head to look around. My heart was pounding, my ears ringing, and the sound kept going, this awful growling right there in my room. I couldn't tell if it was close to me or far away. It was just there, in the room, surrounding me. I don't know how long I lay there like that, but it felt like forever. Then, all at once, the pressure lifted. The sound stopped. My body was my own again. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. There was nothing there. Just my empty room, early morning light slipping through the edges of the curtains. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew what I had felt. I tried to tell myself it was sleep paralysis. Maybe I had been dreaming. Maybe my brain had just gotten stuck somewhere between being asleep and being awake. But I didn't believe it. Not really. The worst thing that happened, though, was the cat. One of the girls I lived with had a cat. It was young, only about a year old, healthy, playful, full of energy. Then one evening, it just died. We were all hanging out in the apartment, nothing out of the ordinary, when we heard it start making these horrible sounds from the bathroom. It wasn't like a normal meow. It was this awful, strangled noise, like it was in pain, like it couldn't breathe. We ran in and found it lying on the floor, tongue out, gasping for air. Its little body trembled, its chest rising and falling in these short, desperate bursts. We didn't know what to do. We just stood there, watching, helpless, as it died right in front of us. It took maybe 10 minutes. 1 minute it was fine, and then it was gone. Just like that. No explanation. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I had been ignoring the feeling in my gut, pushing it down, telling myself I was just being ridiculous. But that was it. I couldn't pretend anymore. Something was wrong with that apartment. Something was off. I packed my things and moved out not long after that. I've never experienced anything like it since. I've lived in plenty of places, old buildings, new ones, places with their own history, but nothing ever felt the way that apartment did. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in any of that supernatural stuff, but I do believe in instincts. And my instincts told me that place wasn't right. I still think about it sometimes, wonder if anyone else who has lived there felt the same way. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was all in my head. But I don't think so. I don't think so at all. The afternoon sun was hot against the pavement as we drove home from school. The traffic was moderate, the usual congestion of students and workers heading home for the day. My friend was behind the wheel, and I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as we approached the main intersection. The light turned red, and we rolled to a stop, waiting for our turn to go. The left turn arrow flashed green. Without hesitation, my friend accelerated, maybe a bit too fast. His tires screeched slightly as we turned, but we thought nothing of it. Just another moment of teenage impatience. But then, something felt off. In the side mirror, I noticed a green pickup truck suddenly lurch forward from behind us. It didn't seem like an accident. It was deliberate. The truck pulled up alongside us on the left, and I turned my head. That's when I saw him. A bald man, his face red, contorted with rage, yelling through his closed window. His mouth moved violently, his lips forming words we couldn't hear, but the anger in his eyes was clear. My stomach clenched. I glanced at my friend, hoping he'd noticed, but he was still focused on the road ahead. "Hey!" I started, but before I could finish, we reached another red light. The truck slowed beside us again, keeping perfect pace. I felt my pulse pick up. "Look," I muttered, nudging my friend. He turned his head, and I saw his expression shift from indifference to alarm. The man was still yelling, his face twisted in fury. Then, he lifted his hand. He made a gun shape with his fingers, pointed it at us. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned the gesture toward his own temple, and mine pulling the trigger. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The light was still red. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He moved his hand toward the glove box. I looked at my friend, my breath caught in my throat. The light turned green. "Go," I barely managed to say. He didn't hesitate. He floored it, the tires screeching, the car lurching forward. I could feel the pressure against my chest as I was pushed back against the seat. A glance in the mirror told me everything I needed to know. The truck was right behind us. My hands were shaking. "What the hell?" I breathed. My friend didn't answer. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his face tight. The truck was tailing us aggressively, inches from our bumper. Too close. Way too close. If he hit us, we'd lose control. "Lose him," I said quickly. "Go to my neighborhood." My friend nodded, his jaw set. He knew the area, but I knew it better. If we could put enough distance between us and that truck, we could take a sharp turn and disappear. The truck stayed with us, relentless. We weaved through traffic, but he followed every move. My pulse pounded in my ears. We finally reached the turn for my neighborhood. My friend barely slowed down as he took the corner. The tires skidded slightly, and I braced myself. "Left," I shouted, pointing at a subdivision. He swerved in without hesitation. We sped down the street, houses blurring past. "Cul-de-sac," I gasped, scanning for a good spot. My eyes locked onto a busy one, multiple cars parked in driveways, kids' bikes on lawns. "There," I pointed. My friend pulled into a driveway, stopping just behind another car, wedging us out of sight. We turned off the engine. The silence was suffocating. We ducked down. I could hear my own breathing, too loud, too fast. Seconds stretched like hours. Then, through the small gap in the window, I saw it, the truck. It rolled past the entrance of the cul-de-sac, moving slowly, searching. My heart slammed against my ribs. It kept going. Neither of us moved for a full minute. Then another. Finally, I exhaled. A shuddering breath. My friend let out a weak laugh, shaking his head. We sat there for a while, letting the adrenaline fade. When we felt ready, we called the cops. We met with an officer near a gas station. Told him everything. He took our statements, wrote everything down. Promised to keep an eye out. We never saw that truck again. Even now, I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't gotten away. If the light had stayed red just a few seconds longer. If my friend had hesitated. I don't know what that man was planning. I don't want to know. All I know is that we got lucky. And sometimes, that's all you can hope for. My grandfather's company was expanding into a remote area of a third-world country, setting up an office for timber and mining operations. They found an old house that was ridiculously cheap, even by local standards. It was large enough to house both the office on the ground floor and the company representative and his family on the upper floor. The locals warned my grandfather not to buy it, saying it was haunted, cursed, that anyone who lived there died horribly. He thought it was just superstitious nonsense. He had seen these things before. People from rural areas always had stories, and in his experience, those stories never amounted to anything real. He bought the house. He assigned one of his employees to oversee the new office. A man in his late 30s, experienced, dependable, a family man. He moved into the house with his wife and their 3 kids. They settled in, and for a while, everything seemed fine. My grandfather expected to hear from him regularly about the progress of the office, updates on hiring, supply chains, logistics. But as the weeks passed, there was nothing. No letters, no phone calls. In that part of the country, losing contact wasn't uncommon. Power outages, bad weather, unmaintained roads. Any number of things could explain the silence. My grandfather wasn't worried. Time kept passing. More silence. A month. Then longer. It became clear something was wrong. He sent messages, tried to get through to local contacts, but still nothing. Finally, he reached out to the local authorities and asked them to check on the house. That was when everything changed. The police arrived at the house. They found the doors locked, the windows dark. When they forced their way inside, they found blood. Everywhere. The walls, the furniture, even the ceiling. It was a massacre. The man, his wife, his 3 children, all dead. Not just dead, butchered. The weapon was a machete, found near the man's body. It was determined that he had killed his entire family, then turned the weapon on himself. He had hacked himself to death. He didn't just slice his wrists or do anything that could be explained away as a quick, desperate act. He had cut deep wounds into his own body, into his arms, his torso, his legs. He had done this with such force and persistence that he bled out where he lay. The room they died in was barricaded. The massive bed had been pushed against the door. The kind of bed that takes multiple men to move, yet he had done it alone. His wife and children's bodies were on the bed. No one knew what to make of it. The police report was filled with contradictions. The official cause of death was classified as a murder-suicide, but even the authorities didn't seem sure how to explain it. The locals, of course, had their own explanation. Spirits, curses, a house that should never have been lived in. Rumors spread. The police officers who saw the crime scene refused to go back. Some said there were things they saw that weren't in the reports, things they couldn't talk about. My grandfather, understanding how bad this could be for business, acted quickly. He pulled every string, paid every bribe necessary to keep the story buried. Officially, the deaths were marked as natural causes, a meaningless label in a place where paperwork was as malleable as cash allowed it to be. No one outside the region ever heard what really happened. With the house empty again, my grandfather tried to assign someone else to take over the office. The company had already invested too much to pull out, but no one would go near the place. Employees refused, even those who hadn't heard the full details of what had happened, even those who didn't believe in ghosts. They just knew the last guy had died there. That was enough. My grandfather tried a different approach. He promoted someone, gave them a new title, made it seem like an opportunity. That man quit the next day. The house remained empty. The office was never set up. The entire project fell apart. My grandfather cut his losses and abandoned the expansion entirely. The land, the house, he let it go. The locals said it was for the best. The house was never meant to be lived in. He should never have bought it in the first place. Years later, he still wouldn't talk about it much. He dismissed the supernatural explanations, refused to entertain the idea that anything other than stress, isolation, or underlying mental illness had caused the man to snap. But there was something about it that always seemed to unsettle him, something he couldn't quite explain, something that stayed with him long after he left that place behind. We were living with my grandparents at the time. It wasn't permanent, just something to get us through a rough patch. My parents were working extra hours, saving up for a place of our own, but until then, the old house belonged to all of us. It was a big place, full of old furniture, the kind with heavy wood and floral upholstery, the kind that smelled like dust and time. My aunt's room was at the end of the hallway, a place I didn't go unless I had to. There was nothing wrong with the room itself, just an old bed, a dresser, a closet, but there was one thing in there that never sat right with me: the doll lamp. It was about 2 feet tall, a Victorian-style doll with pale porcelain skin, golden curls, and a dress made of faded lace. It had been converted into a lamp at some point. The only way to turn it on was to hold its cold plastic hand and lift its arm up and down. My aunt had placed it on the nightstand beside her bed, where it faced the doorway, always watching, always waiting. Its painted blue eyes were wide open, forever staring with that unsettling smile. I hated that doll. I never told anyone, though. It felt stupid to be afraid of a lamp. But still, I avoided looking at it whenever I passed by the room. One afternoon, I was home alone. My grandparents were out grocery shopping, and my parents were at work. It was just me in that big, empty house. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones, makes the air feel heavy. I had been watching TV in the living room when I remembered I needed a blanket. My aunt kept extra ones in her closet, and since I was too lazy to check the linen closet downstairs, I figured I'd just grab one from there. I didn't want to go in, though. Even in broad daylight, the idea of stepping into that room made my stomach twist. But the closet was right next to the doorway. I wouldn't even have to go all the way in. Just a few steps, grab a blanket, and get out. I stood outside the room for a moment, staring at the carpet, forcing myself to breathe. It's fine. Just go in, don't look at it, and leave. I stepped inside, keeping my eyes down. The closet door was already slightly open. Good. I swung it open fully and crouched down, feeling around for a blanket. I pulled one out, ready to leave, when I noticed something was different. The room was brighter. My skin prickled. I knew, without looking, what had happened. The light was on. My breath caught in my throat. My hands clenched the blanket. I wanted to run, to bolt out of that room and never come back, but my body wouldn't move. I had to look. I had to see it for myself. Slowly, I turned my head. The doll's hand was raised, pointed directly at me. I stumbled back, slamming into the closet door. My heart was a wild drum in my chest, pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I couldn't look away from it, from those glassy blue eyes, from that frozen smile that suddenly felt like something more. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like forever. My legs finally obeyed, and I ran. I didn't care about closing the door. I didn't care about anything except getting out of that house. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing on the front porch, gasping for air. The house loomed behind me, quiet still. The sun was warm on my face, but I felt cold. Eventually, my grandparents came home. I didn't tell them what had happened. I didn't tell anyone. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe I had accidentally touched the doll's arm while grabbing the blanket. Maybe it was loose and gravity had pulled it down. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But deep down, I knew. I never stepped foot in that room again. Even when my aunt eventually moved out, even when the doll disappeared, I never went back in. I still think about it sometimes. About that moment. About the way the room changed, the way the air felt charged. And I always come back to the same thought. I was alone in the house. So who turned the light on? My uncle was always a presence in my life, though not a constant one. Before he got sick, I saw him as a familiar but distant figure, someone who showed up at family gatherings, exchanged jokes with my mom, and then left. I didn't think too much about him. He was just my uncle. But when he got sick, everything changed. It started with little things, forgetting words, misplacing objects. Then it got worse. He'd stare at something for minutes, lost in thought, before realizing he didn't know what he was doing. When the doctors told my mom it was brain cancer, I remember her sitting at the kitchen table in silence for a long time. I didn't know what to say. I was young, not yet a teenager, and I couldn't really grasp what was happening beyond the fact that something terrible was coming. Mom and I started visiting him more often. At first, it was just to help with small things, bringing groceries, tidying up. Then it became more serious. He needed someone to make sure he ate, that he took his medication. He needed help with everyday things that once came easily to him. And somewhere along the way, his personality started shifting. I noticed it first in small ways. He'd get irritated when my mom moved things around, even if she was just cleaning. He'd grumble under his breath when she made him food, criticizing how she arranged the plates. It didn't seem like a big deal at first, just the frustration of someone dealing with a horrible disease. But then it escalated. One afternoon, we were at his house, and my mom was stacking his papers into a neat pile on the table. He watched her for a few seconds, then suddenly snapped, calling her stupid. His voice was sharp, almost hateful. She froze, her hands still on the papers, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But she just took a slow breath and kept organizing them. He went on, saying she never did anything right, that she was useless. I stood there, frozen, watching my mom take it. She didn't argue, didn't fight back. I didn't understand how she stayed so calm. It made me angry to see her treated like that, but I was too young to do anything about it. It kept happening. He would flip out over little things, accusing her of moving his things when she hadn't touched them, saying she was taking things from him. One day, he started ranting about his cups, saying she was stealing them. He got so worked up that my mom had to walk out of the room. Later, we found dozens of cups stuffed into his cabinets, far more than anyone would ever need. It was like his brain was splitting apart, one half seeing reality, the other twisting everything into something unrecognizable. Half of what he said was real anger, real insults. The other half came from somewhere else, somewhere not fully connected to reality. I hated seeing my mom go through it. She never complained, but I could see the sadness in her face when we drove home. Even when he was cruel, she still went back. She still helped him. I think that's what confused me the most. They had always been close, at least from what I had seen when I was younger. I remembered family gatherings where they laughed together, where he treated her like a little sister, teasing but kind. Now it was like that relationship had been erased. And then he was gone. The funeral was quiet. I didn't cry, and I don't think my mom did either, at least not in front of anyone. But I knew it hurt her. I could feel it in the way she sat at the dinner table in silence, staring at nothing. A year passed. Life moved on. We didn't talk about my uncle much. It wasn't that we were trying to forget him, just that there wasn't much to say. The memories we had from those last months were complicated, painful. It was easier to leave them alone. Then one evening, we came home to find the answering machine blinking. It was an old one, the kind with a mini cassette tape inside. It was rare for us to get messages. My mom pressed play. The first one was familiar. We had heard it before. My uncle's voice, saying something about when we would visit. Mom let it play through, then went to delete it. But the next one made her pause. It was him, my uncle. But it wasn't a repeat of something we had heard before. It was new. I shouldn't have said that earlier. That was all I remember clearly. The rest of the message was garbled, words broken by static. But the tone was different. It wasn't angry. It wasn't confused. It sounded like he was apologizing. We sat there, listening, letting the silence that followed settle around us. The message had to be old, but why was it only playing now? I saw my mom's face, the way her expression shifted from confusion to something deeper, something harder to name. She didn't say anything for a long time. I tried to make sense of it. I thought about dates, about how answering machines worked. I wanted a rational explanation, something that made sense. But there was nothing. No reason it should have played a year later. No reason we should have heard it for the first time now. My mom rewound the tape and played it again. This time, she let it finish before quietly reaching over and erasing it. We never talked about it after that. The day I found out my uncle was in the hospital, I was sitting in the living room scrolling through my phone. It was an average day, nothing out of the ordinary, until my mom answered a call and her face changed. I didn't even need to hear what was being said. I could tell by her expression alone that it was bad news. My Uncle Dennis had been dealing with heart problems for years, but he always pushed through. He never let anything slow him down. He was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone laugh no matter what they were going through. His humor was infectious. He was the uncle everyone wanted to have. We called the hospital not long after we got the news. I didn't know what to expect when he answered. Would he sound weak? Would he be scared? Would he even be able to talk? But the moment I heard his voice, my worries eased, at least a little. He was still himself, still cracking jokes even as he lay in a hospital bed. His voice was weaker than usual, but his spirit hadn't dimmed one bit. He made fun of the nurses in the most light-hearted way possible, complaining that the food was terrible, but saying at least he wouldn't have to worry about gaining weight anymore. I tried to laugh, but it was hard with the tears running down my face. I could barely get words out. I didn't want him to know how much this was affecting me, but he probably knew anyway. He always knew. He made one last joke, something about how hospitals should offer punch cards. 10 visits, and the next one's free. I laughed through the sobs, but before I could say goodbye, the call had to end. The nurse had to take care of something, or maybe it was a doctor. I don't remember. All I know is that I didn't get to say, "I love you," I didn't get to say goodbye. I told myself there would be another call, that I would get another chance. The next morning, we got the call. The kind of call that leaves you cold, like all the warmth in your body has drained out in an instant. He was gone. Just like that. The hospital said he wanted us to be the first to know. It didn't feel real. I sat there staring at the phone even after the call ended, unable to move, unable to think. My mom cried. My dad sat in silence, his eyes fixed on some faraway point. It wasn't the first time I'd lost someone, but it hit differently this time. Maybe because it was so sudden. Maybe because I never got to say goodbye. Maybe because I thought he would always find a way to pull through like he always had before. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about our conversation. I thought about his voice. I thought about all the times he had made me laugh. I thought about all the things I never got to say. The grief was heavy, sitting on my chest like a weight that wouldn't let me breathe. I tossed and turned for hours, trying to will myself into sleep, but it never really came. I must have drifted off at some point because when I woke up, it was sudden. My eyes just flew open like I had been jolted awake. The room was dark, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. And then I saw it, a small orb of light darting around the room, bouncing off the walls. My heart started pounding. It wasn't like a flashlight beam or a reflection from something outside. It moved too fast, too deliberately. It wasn't normal. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat, and just watched. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. I don't know why, but I had this overwhelming feeling that it was him, that it was Dennis. I felt stupid even thinking it, but the feeling was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. My stomach twisted into knots, my throat dry. I didn't say anything at first, just watched. And then, without really thinking, I muttered, Are you my Uncle Dennis?" The orb stopped moving. It hovered in place for a moment, then slowly drifted toward the wall where I had a picture of him hanging. It stayed there, hovering right over his face. My hands trembled as I pulled the blanket up over my lap. It was like the room had gotten colder, but I wasn't scared. I should have been, but I wasn't. Then, just as I was about to say something else, I heard it. A whisper, right next to my ear. A voice I knew. A voice I had grown up hearing tell the best jokes, the best stories. It was him. Because it fucking wanted to, it has his rights. That joke. Our joke. The one that always made me smile no matter what. The one he had told me 1,000 times. The one I never thought I would hear again. And just like that, the orb was gone. The room was silent again, like nothing had happened. I sat there in the dark, my mind racing, my body frozen in place. But I wasn't scared. For the first time since I got the call, I felt okay. I wasn't happy, not by any means, but I wasn't drowning in grief either. It was like he had found a way to let me know he was still there, still watching, still making sure I smiled even when I wanted to cry. I laid back down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside. Sleep didn't come right away, but when it did, it was peaceful. In the morning, everything felt different. Lighter. Like the weight on my chest wasn't as heavy as it had been the day before. I still missed him. I would always miss him. But I knew he was okay. I knew in some way he was still with me. And somehow, that was enough. When I was 22, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment with my boyfriend. We were young, broke, and completely in love. The apartment was old, the kind that had layers of paint so thick you could chip them off like bark from a tree. The kitchen appliances were outdated, the carpet smelled vaguely of something I never quite placed, and the bathroom window sat right inside the shower, always slightly warped from years of steam and neglect. Despite all its flaws, it was ours. It was home. We made do with what we had, laughing at the little inconveniences and pretending like our situation was just another adventure. My boyfriend worked graveyard shifts, and I worked days, so we spent a lot of time apart. But when we were together, we appreciated the little moments. We found ways to stay close, even if our schedules didn't align. And in those early mornings when I was just waking up and he was coming home, he'd sometimes sneak up to the bathroom window to catch a peek of me in the shower, grinning like a mischievous kid when I caught him. It was harmless, playful, something we both laughed about. Then one day, I noticed a log standing upright outside the bathroom window. At first, I thought it was something my boyfriend had put there to get a better look, though he didn't need it. He was tall enough already. When I asked him about it, he acted confused, said it wasn't his, and we chalked it up to the yard workers moving things around. He kicked it away, but it always found its way back. A few days would pass, and there it would be again, standing right under that warped little window. We ignored it, assuming it was nothing. Eventually, before the first snowfall, the yard workers cleared all the debris away, and the log disappeared. When our lease was up, we decided to stay in the same complex but moved to a larger, cheaper 2-bedroom apartment on the other end of the property. It was a great deal, but it came with a trade-off. Our first apartment had been on a suburban street, facing houses and quiet sidewalks. Now, our new place backed up to an abandoned strip mall. Our front yard was a dark alley lined with dumpsters from a closed-down Chinese buffet, home to a feral cat colony that yowled at night. The streetlights barely worked, and there was a lingering smell of rotting food in the summer heat. Still, the space was bigger, and we didn't think too much about it. We were happy, and that was enough. That year, on Valentine's Day, my boyfriend proposed. He had been so excited that he couldn't keep the secret, blurting out the question before he even had a chance to properly ask. Of course, I said yes. We didn't have much money, so he got a good deal on a ring from a friend's father who owned a jewelry store. It was beautiful, but there had been a mix-up. The ring was a size 12. My fingers were a size 4. We couldn't afford to resize it, so he left it in his car's glove box, intending to take it back the next day. That night, a snowstorm hit. By morning, when he went to his car, he found the door slightly ajar. Someone had broken in. Nothing else was taken, just the rings. We searched every pawn shop, every secondhand jewelry store. No one had seen them. I started to resent seeing women with large hands wearing silver rings with Celtic knots, convinced that my stolen ring had ended up on the finger of some stranger, given to her by a man who never paid for it. We never had the money to replace it. It was just gone, a moment we would never get back. By summer, our money troubles worsened. We lost our phone service after missing a few payments. The city's budget cuts hit hard, and police stations in our area shut down. Crime went up, but we didn't think much of it. It didn't feel real, not in the daylight. One evening, after my boyfriend had gone to bed early, I decided to take a long bath. It had been a hot day, and I wanted to relax, let the stress melt away. I filled the tub, adding bubbles and salts, then opened the small bathroom window to let in the night air. The summer breeze was thick and warm. I grabbed my laptop, set it on the toilet seat, and put on a movie. The water was perfect, and I lost track of time. One movie turned into another. The air cooled as night deepened, but I didn't mind. The open window felt good. Eventually, I drained the tub. The water swirled away, leaving me sitting in the cooling porcelain, reluctant to move. I stretched, stood, and grabbed a towel, drying off slowly. The air from the window hit my damp skin, sending a small chill through me, but I didn't close it. The apartment needed to air out. As I stepped out of the tub, my foot brushed against the pile of clothes I had left near the doorway. I maneuvered around them, stepping toward the partially open door, turning back for one last glance at the tub. That was when I saw him. At first, I thought it was my boyfriend, but then I noticed the eyes, too high in the window. My stomach dropped. My brain struggled to understand what I was seeing. A man was standing outside the window. A man. He was standing on something tall enough to bring his entire torso into view. He was staring at me, completely still. Then his hand moved. The motion caught my eye. He was touching himself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my mind a swirling void of disbelief and terror. That's when I saw it. On his finger was a silver ring, a Celtic knot design. A scream rose in my throat, but it never came out. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I turned and ran, slamming the bathroom door behind me, bolting for the bedroom. I dove under the covers, shaking violently, unable to do anything but repeat the same desperate thought over and over. Make him go away. Make him go away. Make him go away. I don't remember how long it took before I could finally force myself to move, to wake my boyfriend. He rushed outside, but the man was already gone. There was nothing left behind, except the log, standing upright outside the window. We went to the police, but without phones, we had to drive 20 minutes to the nearest station. The report was filed, but with the cuts, there was nothing they could do. No officers to spare. No investigation to follow up. We couldn't afford to break the lease. We lived the rest of that year in fear. I covered every window with black contact paper, wedged boards in every frame so they couldn't be opened. The bathroom window never opened again. I carried pepper spray every time I stepped outside. I never went out after dark. And almost every night, just faintly, I would hear something outside our bedroom window, the softest noise barely there. And every morning, when my boyfriend would check, there would be footprints in the dirt, as if someone had been standing there, watching, waiting. I wish I could say it was just a story, but it wasn't. I've been waiting for a while to post this story, so hopefully, whoever reads it enjoys it and gets as creeped out as I did. To start, I just want to say that I've never been the type of person to get caught up in the idea of paranormal activities or ghost stories. Even at a young age, those types of stories seemed completely unbelievable to me, and I could never take them seriously. With that being said, what I'm about to post is something that happened to me a few years ago that pretty much changed all of that. It's not an overly scary story, but I think the simplicity of it is what creeped me out as much as it did. My mom was in the real estate business, which often required her to check out houses on her own before taking customers with her. She would usually just do this on her own, but every once in a while, she would take me along. Well, this house comes on the market that many other agents apparently say is haunted, and my mom figured she'd take me along. I'll be honest, the house was pretty creepy. It was completely covered in vines, the front steps were cracked, and the paint on the door was peeling. The front windows had this film of dust and grime, and the whole place just had a neglected, forgotten look. But whatever, it's an old house, not really a big deal or out of the ordinary. We step inside, and immediately that smell hits me. It was that musty, stale air smell that houses get when they've been empty for a while. It wasn't unbearable, but it just added to the overall eerie feel of the place. The first floor was nothing special. The furniture was still there, covered in a thin layer of dust, like someone had just up and left one day and never came back. There were plates in the kitchen cabinets, books on the shelves, even an old clock on the mantel that had stopped at some random time years ago. It was as if the house had been frozen in time. The first thing that struck me as a little odd was the TV. It was one of those old-style box TVs, the kind with dials instead of buttons. It was turned on, which was strange in itself because there was no one else in the house. And what made it even weirder was that it was playing some old black and white World War II documentary. The grainy footage, the crackling audio, and the flickering screen just made the whole atmosphere even gloomier. We moved on, checking out the first floor rooms. The dining room was just a normal dining room, table, chairs, china cabinet. The kitchen was outdated, with yellowing countertops and a rust-stained sink. The living room had an old piano in the corner, its keys covered in dust. It was all just old. Then we went upstairs. The second floor was set up so that there was one long hallway with 3 doors staggered down its length. The first room we checked out was a bedroom. Pretty normal. The furniture was still there, bed, dresser, nightstand. But the sheets on the bed were pulled up tight, like they hadn't been touched in years. It smelled faintly of mothballs. The second room, though, that's where things got weird. We opened the door, and the first thing I notice is that the entire room is filled with stuffed animals. But not toy stuffed animals. I'm talking about real stuffed animals, taxidermy. The walls were lined with glassy-eyed deer heads. There were foxes, raccoons, birds, even a bobcat mounted on the wall. In the center of the room, there was a large bear rug with its mouth open in a permanent snarl. I'm not the type to get freaked out by taxidermy, but something about that room just felt wrong. The air was heavier in there. The silence was thicker. We didn't spend long in that room. It wasn't like anything was out of place. It was just unsettling. So we left and went to check out the last room at the end of the hall. It was another bedroom, pretty similar to the first. Same kind of furniture, same musty smell. Nothing weird about it. We decided to head back downstairs. As we walked past the taxidermy room, something made me glance back inside. And that's when I saw it. A chair, sitting directly in the center of the room. I stopped in my tracks. My mom stopped too. We just stood there, staring at it. That chair had not been there before. We had walked through that room, looked around, and there was absolutely nothing in the middle of the floor. It wasn't like it had been slightly moved or was in a different position. This chair was sitting perfectly centered in the room, as if it had been deliberately placed there. Neither of us had touched it. We had been together the whole time. There was no one else in the house. I remember feeling this deep, sinking feeling in my stomach. It was such a small thing, just a chair, but the impossibility of it is what got to me. It made no sense. There was no explanation. We left. Quickly. Neither of us said much as we walked back to the car. My mom locked the front door behind her, and we got in. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at the house. The upstairs window of the taxidermy room was facing the street, and I swear, just for a second, I thought I saw something move inside. I never went back to that house. In the years since, I've looked it up a few times out of curiosity. It's been sold 5 or 6 times, and every owner seems to say the same thing. Strange things happen when they're inside. Nothing dramatic, nothing over the top, just small, unsettling things. Things moving on their own. Doors that won't stay closed. An old box TV that turns on by itself in the middle of the night. Like something, or someone, doesn't want people living there. I still don't believe in ghosts. But I also don't have an explanation for what happened in that house. And that's what bothers me the most.